Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto stole more than one forbidden scroll during the incident part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. 10-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was having the day of his life. Today was his birthday, but that wasn't what made it special. For the first time ever he had beaten Uchiha Sasuke, the best fighter in his class, in a sparring match. It didn't matter that Naruto had cracked the system the instructors used to assign partners and designated sparring circles based on calendar date, or that he had rigged a circle the night before by half burying several marbles into the center, concealed it with a layer of loose dirt, and then during the match, lured Sasuke over the trap where he lost his footing and tumbled into Naruto's waiting fist. Ninjas were supposed to be sneaky, and this was Naruto's first of what would undoubtedly be an unbroken series of victories over that broody bastard, en route to being the greatest Hokage ever. That wasn't all though. Weeks of meticulous planning and covert action had culminated in the unveiling of his greatest prank yet. He had gotten the idea from academy classes on methods of passing secret messages via invisible ink, and after extensive library research and experimentation, had figured out how to spike the academy's practice invisible ink with various colors. Several nights of secret Hokage monument painting with invisible ink, then an hour after classes with a hand pump hose and a barrel of ink reagent, and the fruits of his labor was visible for all Konoha to see. Naruto thought the fourth Hokage looked particularly imposing with pink hair and purple lipstick, and Jiji didn't look bad either with green hair and red swirls on his cheeks. Of course, not everyone in Konoha shared Naruto's refined sense of humor, so he wisely chose to hide out in the forest until nightfall to evade pursuit. To complete the perfection that was this day, he had the foresight to prearrange a hiding place with a crate of cup ramen, bottled water, and a cooking pot. It was a happy and sated Naruto that finally made his way back into Konoha around midnight. The whole day had gone off without a hitch, and the only way that it could have been better is if Naruto had found some way to have old man Ichiraku deliver freshly made ramen to his hiding spot without giving himself away. He was so caught up in his thoughts, dreaming up ever more audacious ideas for his next and greater prank, that he didn't hear the footsteps converging behind him, didn't notice the faint scent of alcohol. By the time he saw the shadows and turned, it was already too late. Sarutobi Hiruzen looked down at the frail young blonde beside him with a heavy heart. It had become routine for him to visit the boy in his private hospital room for a few minutes each night after leaving the office. He would spend the time talking to the boy, looking for some signal of recognition, trying to find some spark of life. Sarutobi knew that the young orphan's life had been difficult. Despite the fourth's wishes and his own best efforts, the majority of people had chosen to project their grief and rage over the death and destruction from the Kyuubi's attack on the only target they could find, the child who served as the demon fox's container. He knew that Naruto regularly faced hostile glares and whispered insults, and suspected that a number of merchants were conspiring to sell him poor quality goods at inflated prices. He never imagined however that any of Konoha's citizens could take things so far as to try to kill a defenseless child in cold blood. An Anbu patrol had found Naruto, badly beaten and near death, in a dark alley in one of the seedier parts of the village. It had taken Konoha Hospital's best trauma team hours to stabilize the boy, and another 3 months would pass before his injuries fully healed, with one exception. But he never woke up. After spending 4 months bedridden in a coma, Naruto was a shell of his former ebullient self. His skin was pale and pasty, and his once vibrantly golden hair hung limply in faded shades of yellow. The hospital's head doctor had assured the Hokage that there was nothing physically wrong with the boy and that all treatment methods of waking him had been tried. Now they could do nothing but wait and see if Naruto ever emerged from the coma on his own. Sarutobi had launched an investigation right away. His personal feelings for Naruto's side, he was determined that villagers heartless enough to beat a young orphan nearly to death be punished under the full extent of Konoha military law. Perhaps something like that was acceptable in other hidden villages. But his predecessors, his successor, and he himself had worked too hard and sacrificed too much for the village for him to allow Konoha to go down that path. At first there were no leads, his determination standing in the face of the villagers' seeming unity in its hatred of the Kyuubi's vessel. It was only when Sarutobi ordered the Inuzuka and Yamanaka to join the investigation with their specialized clan abilities that results were produced. The aged Hokage glanced at the wall clock and sighed. Once again he had allowed himself to overstay his own self-imposed time limit for visiting Naruto. Placing a gentle hand on the boy's forehead, Sarutobi made his farewell as he had every day for the last 4 months. "I'm sorry Naruto, I have to go now. This old man still has to get up to work in the morning." Pausing at the door, Sarutobi turned and looked at the boy again. Laying in the adult-sized hospital bed and illuminated by the shard of wan moonlight from the room's single window, he looked ethereally fragile. "I wish I could have done more for you." Naruto awoke with a groan, wondering why his throat tasted like someone had shoved an entire box of cotton swabs down it. Blinking his eyes open, he was immediately assaulted by painfully harsh light. He slammed his eyelids shut and brought his hands up to cover them, only for his left arm to be jerked back down. Opening his right eyelid a sliver at a time and peeking through the gaps of his fingers, Naruto tried to figure out where he was. His eye, long unaccustomed to processing light, grudgingly and haltingly reacted. The indistinct sea of whiteness that had been Naruto's world slowly gave way to 3 blurry white walls and a window that let the light of a midday sun stab straight to his brain if he looked directly at it. The hospital room. That must mean his left arm was being held down by intravenous tubes. The blonde boy was no stranger to Konoha Hospital. Living alone as an orphan meant stays at the hospital where other children might have been tended to by parents at home, not to mention the implementation accidents and encounters with angry villagers from the pranks he pulled. But still, he had never felt quite this horrible waking up in the hospital before. Naruto slowly pushed himself to a sitting position, hissing with surprise at just how much effort it took. A few more minutes of blinking had finally adjusted his vision to the brightness. The room looked like the other hospital rooms he had been in before, but by the sheer number of intravenous drips and devices he was connected to, he could tell that whatever had put him in the hospital this time had been serious. His body also looked different, but that wasn't all. It was like something at the edge of his vision. No, not at the edge. He waved his right hand back and forth in front his face slowly, surprised at how quickly it disappeared. Then, tentatively, he gently pushed against the skin on his face at the edge of his left eye. Nothing. He pushed his finger closer and closer, hand trembling more with every step. The door burst open, the third Hokage striding purposefully through with an Anbu guard and Konoha Hospital's chief of medicine immediately behind him. Before he could register what was happening, Naruto was enveloped in a bone-crunching hug. "Digi can't breathe," Naruto gasped. Sarutobi released the young blonde from the hug, holding him firmly by his shoulders and noting how little muscle there was between skin and bone. "Naruto, I came as soon as I heard. How do you feel? How much do you remember?" "Remember? What happened? How long was I out?" Sarutobi sighed. "It's been almost 5 months, Naruto." 5 months? The doctor intruded then, insisting he needed to perform some tests. The Hokage spent the next half hour watching in silence, with the doctor examining the medical machines Naruto was connected to, checking various parts of the boy's body for physical responses, and occasionally asking him some questions and receiving curt mumbled answers in reply. Throughout the duration of the procedure, Sarutobi watched as Naruto's features went through an array of emotions, starting from shock and confusion, progressing through anger and sadness, before finally settling on a blank detached visage halfway through. The last disturbed him. He had come to know Naruto's various moods quite well over the years, and the boisterous young blonde had never shown any inclination for hiding his emotions. In the end, the doctor declared that Naruto was physically fine, though frail from months of inactivity, and could be discharged after 2 weeks of observation and physical therapy. A hand gesture from Sarutobi sent the doctor and the Anbu guard away, leaving the aged Hokage and the boy he considered to be his adoptive grandchild alone in the room. Naruto spoke first, his voice soft and restrained. "What happened? I remember painting the Hokage monument. I spent the day in the forest hiding out afterwards, and then, nothing. An Anbu patrol found you badly beaten in an alley after midnight. They brought you to the hospital, and you've been in a coma ever since." "How bad was it?" "It was bad, broken bones and internal bleeding. At first the doctors didn't think you'd make it. It was 3 months before all your injuries healed." "What about my left eye?" Sarutobi grimaced, as much from the content of the question as the tonelessly flat way it had been asked. "You were brought in with a lot of bleeding inside your skull. The doctors were able to stop the bleeding, but by then the optic nerves had been destroyed. There was no way to save your eye. I'm sorry. Did you find out who did it?" "They've been dealt with," Sarutobi stated simply. Naruto nodded slightly, accepting and processing everything he'd heard so far. A few moments of silence passed before he spoke again. "Why? Why what? Why did they do it?" Naruto Sarutobi began uncertainly. He was no stranger to difficult choices. As Hokage's position made the welfare of all of Konoha his responsibility, he had made decisions that would start or end wars and issued orders that meant almost certain death for loyal subordinates. But for some reason he found this choice to be one of the most difficult he had ever made. "Why, all of it? I need to know." Naruto's voice cracked as he finished, and for the first time during the conversation, he looked up and made eye contact with Sarutobi. The Hokage was startled by what he saw. The blank detachment was gone from Naruto's face. Instead, it was replaced by an expression of abject loneliness and quiet desperation that he hadn't seen for years, since before the boy had declared his goal of making people recognize him by becoming Hokage. Sarutobi made his decision. "Naruto, there's something you need to know. This is the most important thing I've ever told you, and I need you to listen to me and hold your questions until I'm done. Can you do that?" Naruto nodded uncertainly. Saratobi put his hand gently on the boy's own in the hope that the small gesture of physical connection would make what was to come easier on the boy. 10 years ago, as you know, Konoha was attacked by the Kyuubi. The way it's taught at the academy doesn't really give you an idea of the sheer scale of devastation the Kyuubi caused. It was like the worst natural disaster you could imagine, but brought about by something utterly powerful and evil beyond human comprehension. It was a fundamentally life-altering event for those of us who lived through it, something that still haunts our nightmares to this day. Saratobi paused a few seconds to let the young boy absorb what he had heard so far. Konoha lost many good shinobi that day. None of the clan families emerged unscathed. Worst of all, the fourth sacrificed his own life to end the threat. He had been Konoha's greatest hero during the Third Great War and was at the prime of his life when the Kyuubi attacked. We all looked up to him, projected our hopes for a better, more peaceful future on him. When we lost him, it nearly broke us as a people. The grief that fell over us, it's something I hope you'll never have to experience. I know what they teach at the academy, but as powerful as the fourth was, he couldn't defeat the Kyuubi. Maybe it's an elemental part of the world that simply can't be destroyed, I don't know. All I can tell you is that it was a time of desperation that you couldn't possibly understand. The Kyuubi was approaching Konoha and nothing was working. Many good men and women, some of them civilians, went out to meet the threat, knowing that death was inevitable, just to buy a few more minutes. Out of that desperation, the fourth came up with an audacious and terrible plan. It was a forbidden jutsu that demanded the sacrifice of the user's own life, so ancient secret that no one knows its origins, and no one could remember it ever being used since Konoha was founded. Using this jutsu, the fourth called forth a Shinigami, a god of death, to pull the Kyuubi's essence out. But that was only a temporary solution. If the Kyuubi wasn't locked away somehow, it would simply regenerate itself. So, with his last breath, the fourth sealed the Kyuubi's essence into a newborn baby. Saratobi paused again, trying to think of the right words. He didn't have to, however. That baby was me. Naruto said tonelessly. He had dropped eye contact, and his face had returned to its former blankness. Saratobi was slightly unnerved by the way Naruto responded. He had known that he would have to disclose this secret to Naruto at some point and had gone through many different scenarios in his head. He had imagined Naruto angry and yelling, sad and crying, and many responses in between. What he had not envisioned, however, was this flat emotionless nothing. Why baby? Why not something else? The Kyuubi at essence is a creature of chakra and would have eventually overwhelmed and broken down the seal on anything else. A baby, with an undeveloped chakra system, can grow to maintain the seal as the baby ages. The fourth designed the seal so that part of the Kyuubi's chakra would be continuously diverted into the host, integrating with and reinforcing the host's own chakra system. So, am I turning into the demon fox? The young blonde's hand trembled as fear, anger, confusion, and sadness played across his face in a confused jumble. After Naruto's previous emotional detachment, Saratobi was glad for the display, but knew that he had to answer the boy quickly and decisively. No. Listen to me, Naruto, he said, reaching over and forcefully turning Naruto's head to make eye contact again. You're the jailer for the Kyuubi, you're not what you contain. You're the one protecting Konoha from the Kyuubi now, and the fourth wanted you to be seen as a hero. Even if most of the villagers refuse to see past their own ignorance, you are a hero. Saratobi dropped his arm and slumped backwards into his chair. As Hokage and therefore technically an active shinobi of the leaf, he made it a point to keep himself in reasonable physical condition. But now he felt all the weight of his years and more pressing down on him. Rubbing his hands tiredly against his eyes, he asked, "What are you thinking?" Naruto did not answer immediately because he didn't know what to think at the moment. He needed time to gather his disparate emotional reactions into something coherent. More than anything, he was angry at what had been done to him, that the course of his life had been determined before he had even had much of a life. Thinking back on his life so far, he also felt sadness at how he had been treated, despite the fourth's wishes, and despite his role in defeating the greatest threat Konoha had ever faced to its existence. And underneath it all, there was an undercurrent of pride that the fourth Hokage had chosen him over all others to be the Demon Fox's jailer. "I don't know," Naruto finally replied. I think I'll be okay, but I need time." The Hokage nodded. In truth, he knew that this was as good a reaction as he could realistically hope to get. He had placed a terrible burden of knowledge on Naruto and made him understand just why he had been treated so poorly by the village and just how unfair it was. The young blonde was confused and conflicted but did not appear to want revenge. Sitting in a hospital room with Naruto, after a 5-month coma preceded by the boy nearly dying, he could not have begrudged Naruto even if he did want revenge. "What I've told you is an S-class secret. No one in Konoha is allowed to reveal this to others on pain of death. There are only 2 exceptions to this law. The Hokage can reveal this secret for the good of the village. You, as the subject of the secret itself, can choose to reveal this secret to whoever you wish." Naruto looked at Saratobi uncertainly, trying to figure out what the aged Hokage was saying. I had hoped, between the fourth's wishes and mine, that people would see you as a hero. But that wasn't how it turned out. Perhaps I didn't try hard enough, or perhaps after everything that had taken place it was simply not possible. I don't know, but I passed a law once I saw what was happening. As much as I wish otherwise, I can't change the way people think. So I made this law to prevent the beliefs of the older generation from being passed on. That way, at least you will have a chance with people your age. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Naruto nodded in acceptance again. Several minutes passed in silence, each trying to sort through his own thoughts, before Naruto spoke again. So what happens now? Sarutobi knew the meaning behind the question. In peacetime the village only accepted ninja who were physically and mentally whole. Exceptions were made for already established shinobi who were crippled in the service of Konoha but still managed to remain effective. As an academy student however, Naruto would never be allowed to graduate with only one eye. He looked at Naruto, who had broken eye contact again and was slipping back into an emotionless mask. In the boy's features he could still see traces of a much younger Naruto from years ago, who lived without dreams or goals for the future and whose face had seemed etched permanently with loneliness. Unbidden his mind superimposed an image from the distant memory of his own childhood. A well-worn child's doll, missing an arm, laying haphazardly on a pile of trash in an alleyway. Discarded because it no longer had a purpose. Sarutobi shook himself from his reverie. After having decided to tell Naruto about his past, the rest seemed easy. You can return to the academy as soon as you get out of here. A surprised look met him, prompting him to continue. If it's what you still want, I'll make you a promise. If you can meet all the academy's genin qualification standards, I'll see to it that you're allowed to graduate and take up ninja duties. But what about everyone else? They won't like it, they'll think. Sarutobi had no doubt what Naruto had meant when he said everyone else. He waved his hand and cut the boy off. It doesn't matter, you leave that to this old man. You have enough burdens already. Just promise me you can do it. Naruto paused to examine his own feelings. Jiji had long ago drilled into him, once he had declared his goal of becoming the Hokage, the importance of promises. Was this a promise he was prepared to make? He didn't know how he felt about his dream for the future anymore, or even about becoming a shinobi of the leaf. He was prepared to sacrifice everything for people who ignored or hated him in order to gain their recognition and approval. But to do the same for those who actively tried to kill him. He didn't know if it was something he could do. But what else was there for him to do? He reached back for memories from his youth, from before the orphanage had kicked him out. Before Jiji had taken him to Ichiraku's for his first bowl of ramen, before the conversation that had changed his life. There weren't many memories he could pull up, his life then had been little more than a pale existence, and one day of no one looking at him was much like another. No, he couldn't go back to that, couldn't live like that again. A faded dream was better than no dream at all. Jiji was offering him a lifeline, and he was going to grasp it with both hands. Naruto looked the aged Hokage in the eye and nodded firmly. I'll do it. It's my promise of a lifetime. Sarutobi smiled and ruffled the young blonde's hair. I know you will. Naruto's return to the academy was humiliating. Academically he was well behind the other students of his class, having spent 5 months in the hospital. That didn't bother him much however, he knew he could make up the difference with enough effort on his part. He had also expected his already meager thrown weapon skill to drop off precipitously, where he once was able to get 4 out of 10 throws somewhat on target without the benefit of parallax. He was lucky if 4 out of 10 even landed on the large wooden post that held the target. He was never going to be great at thrown weapons like that girl he had seen 1 year ahead, but he knew that with enough practice, he could bring his skill back up to at least qualify for genin level by graduation. His biggest problem however was in Taijutsu. The loss of muscle from his extended hospitalization had immediately dropped him from the top half to the bottom half of the class in sparring ability. And once the others learned how to take advantage of his field of vision, even Sakura was able to beat him 1 match out of 3. He had responded by making repeated forays into the library to research alternative Taijutsu styles and strategies and then trying to imitate them crudely in an attempt to catch his sparring partners off guard. Nothing worked however. His worst experience was when Sasuke, seeking revenge for being beaten months ago, had thrashed Naruto up and down the practice lot for the duration of class, using only 1 arm and with a mocking smirk permanently plastered on his face. Even after he had managed to rebuild all his lost muscle mass, he was still well in the bottom half of the class in terms of sparring ability. This led Naruto to 2 conclusions. First, he decided that he needed every edge he could get with his impairment. He returned to wearing the arm and leg weights that had been part of his physical therapy and added more weight as well as a weighted body vest as he got used to the extra load. He also embarked on a grueling training regimen, roughly copying that of an older academy student with the freakishly large eyebrows. Second, he realized that against an equally skilled opponent, he would always be at a significant handicap in a straight Taijutsu fight. In academy training sessions there was no way around it, but once he became a real ninja, he needed to do everything possible to not be caught in straight taijutsu fights. This meant that he only needed his taijutsu to be good enough to graduate as a genin, and also that he needed to find some way to avoid straight taijutsu situations once he graduated. Naruto found his answer in swords. Swords were an uncommon weapon choice amongst ninja. One reason was simply inertia. They were typically trained with taijutsu for close combat, and once undertaking actual missions, most simply chose to continue with what worked for them. Another problem with swords was stealth. It was much more difficult to be sneaky and quiet with a giant sword worn on the back than with several braces of kunai and shuriken in well-designed holsters padded for noise prevention. Finally there was the matter of hand seals. All but the simplest jutsu required two-handed seals to perform. Where a taijutsu fighter with a kunai could simply throw it and draw a new one after performing the seals, a kinjutsu fighter had to undertake the much lengthier and potentially fatal process of sheathing or securing his weapon and redrawing after. For these and other reasons, dedicated sword users were a small minority in the ninja world, even in the village of Kiri, which was noted for producing highly skilled swordsmen. None of these reasons mattered to Naruto. The extra reach a sword provided would make it more difficult for opponents to get close enough to exploit his reduced field of vision. If they did manage to get within range, closely held horizontal slashes could be used to attack and clear large parts of his personal space without needing visual perception and accuracy. Stealth was a potential problem, but his pranking experience had given him far beyond academy levels of proficiency in this area, and he was sure he could adjust without much difficulty. As for hand seals, it simply wasn't an issue as he didn't have any jutsu that were particularly useful in a fight. Should that situation change, he would simply have to find a way around that new problem as he had this one. Maybe some kind of blades attached to my wrists. Naruto mused as he took practice swings with his new toy, a wooden replica of the straight-bladed ninja to that Anbu sometimes used. A good quality steel blade was far beyond his meager financial means, but after some creative scrounging, he was able to find a discarded wooden training sword and repair it to usable condition with duct tape. Still, there were some unexpected benefits to his situation. Several weeks after his hospital discharge, he had come across a one-eyed jounin with silver hair while making his way out of the village to a training ground. He had decided to adopt the jounin ninja's style, replacing his hospital bandage with a tilted headband covering his missing eye. Seeing how people reacted to this ninja, however, had also triggered Naruto's creative spark, which had once served him so well in planning his pranks. He had returned to academy classes shortly after his year group began studying Henj no Jutsu in earnest and had spent many evenings practicing on his own in order to catch up. As the academy instructors taught it, the amount and quality of your initial transformation depended entirely on your skill, while the duration you could maintain the transformation depended entirely on your chakra supply. Some of the top students like Sasu could already henge into reasonable approximations of their academy instructors, but they could only hold it for several minutes at a time. Naruto, on the other hand, had great difficulty going beyond transforming specific body parts like hair color or height, but he could hold his transformations for hours without feeling drained. That was something he could work with. It was not difficult for him to gather and modify the equipment he needed: some silver hair dye and gel, a battered Chunin-style protective vest, dark blue pants and long-sleeved shirt. He also lucked into what would turn out to be the most important thing in his entire plot, a discarded little book with an orange cover. After donning his equipment and applying a henge to make himself a foot taller and appear with a Konoha forehead protector instead of an ordinary headband, his disguise was nearly complete. A little practice walking around the village with his face buried in the book, occasionally giggling like an idiot, and most people were actively trying not to make eye contact with him. It was a perfect disguise for walking around without being noticed. Or rather, with people deliberately trying not to notice him. It also had the added benefit of getting him good quality merchandise, along with the active duty shinobi discount from merchants whenever he shopped this way. For the boy who had endured so much, life was finally looking up. The nightmares were getting worse. They began as vague images and distant sounds. Nothing he could identify, but they were enough to wake him in the middle of the night. He responded by doubling his efforts during his waking hours, reading and training himself into exhaustion before dragging himself to bed deep into each night. At first it worked, and his sleep was dreamless if not entirely sufficient. But eventually the nightmares returned no matter how tired he was, and he could no longer wake until they had run their course each night. He supposed they weren't nightmares in the proper sense. He was always aware that he was having a nightmare and could even recall details of his waking day as well as of nightmares from past nights. Yet there was nothing he could do to alter the course of each nightmare as it took place, no choice or action he could take, no point at which he could simply decide to stop and not take the next step. It was as if he was experiencing events through someone else's body. The nightmares became two different yet familiar variants. The first type started with furtive glimpses of things that resembled dead bodies, the smell of decay, and piles of bones. They grew into visions of carnage, battlefields littered with corpses, a cacophony of wails and pleas from the near dead. Sometimes it was just a vision of staring into a hollow moon for hours, though the smells and sounds coming from beyond his vision made him both afraid to look and afraid of not knowing at the same time. Once he experienced himself diving headfirst into a corpse's torn open abdomen, as if eating its contents. He threw up all over his bed as soon as he woke from that one. The other type of nightmare was much less subdued, though he dreaded them nearly as much for the constant lonely atmosphere he experienced during them. They were always visions of the interior rooms of a Western-style mansion, from the clock tower, through the seemingly infinite library, down to the depths of its basement areas. The entire mansion was painted in deep red motifs, and the constant darkness gave everything an oppressively gloomy look. From time to time he could make out high-pitched giggles, but no matter where he went within the mansion, he could never find anyone else. It was just unending emptiness and silence otherwise, until the feeling of claustrophobia that continually constricted on his mind during these dreams eventually overwhelmed him into wakefulness. Tonight was different. He was walking through some kind of caves or sewers. It was hard to tell with so little light. He could smell the stench of rot that he had become so familiar with everywhere now. The breathy giggles were there too, echoing lightly through the tunnels occasionally. Every time he reached a branch in the tunnels, a disembodied whispered phrase from the same girlish voice would lead him down one path over all others. The words used felt old and familiar, but he could never quite make out what the voice was saying. It felt like he had been walking for hours, something compelling him to put one foot in front of the other, before he noticed that the tunnels had been getting progressively less dim. Picking up his pace, he made his way through the last few tunnels, past a final curve, and came upon a large cavern. It was a little girl who had led him here with her whispers. She looked to be 8 or 9 years old, just a bit younger than him. A white mop hat with a tattered red ribbon covered bright blonde hair, like his own, but flowing in lazy waves down just beyond the nape of her neck. She wore a white short-sleeved undershirt with a red vest, and her frilled red skirt twirled around her legs as she ran back and forth, trying to catch something he couldn't see. Wherever she moved, the cavern seemed to keep the area around her well lit, though he couldn't find any obvious light source. "Ani-chan. You've finally come." She chirped brightly as she turned to look at him. It was then that his eyes met hers. They had blood-red irises, but where red should have surrounded black pupils, pools of dark maroon stared back at him. He replied lamely. Whatever he had been expecting to find at the end of the tunnels, this little girl wasn't it. She skipped closer, high-pitched giggles echoing throughout the cavern. As both of her small delicate hands reached out for him, he found his own hand being enclosed in an inhumanly strong vice grip. A small part of his mind noted the absence of pain despite his mental certainty that his hand was being crushed. "Come on. I've been waiting for you forever and ever." He found himself half led, half dragged deeper into the cavern until the pair came to a section of ground lined with chalk markings. It was a crudely drawn hopscotch grid, bent lines and childish kanji for the numbers. He felt movement against his hand and looked down. A small pebble had been pressed into his apparently undamaged hand. He shrugged and tossed the pebble. He had learned long ago that he could not wake from his dreams until they were ready to release him, and this was less unpleasant than most he'd had. "You're really good at this, Ani-chan. This is so much more fun than playing by myself. This is pretty surreal," he thought to himself as he stood to one side, watching the little girl take her turn at the grid. She seemed to be having the time of her life, shouting and laughing, hair flowing in some invisible wind that seemed to caress only her, red skirt dancing around her legs like flames. She was having fun with the exuberant vibrancy that only small children seem to manage, and he couldn't help but be drawn into the scene. After several rounds of hopscotch and an impromptu game of tag, initiated when the little girl simply beamed him with a stone and screamed tag. "You're it." She stopped and looked off into the distance for a few moments. "It's almost time for you to go," she pouted sadly as she turned back to him, "but do you want to see it first?" She took his hand again, more gently this time, and led him deeper into the cavern. They came across what appeared to be a very large alcove, with its entrance blocked by an intricate pattern of crisscrossing chains. A flimsy piece of rectangular paper, bearing a symbol drawn in some strange weaving style, was stuck to what appeared to be the center of the chain's web pattern. He turned and looked at her questioningly, and she pulled him closer to the alcove in reply. A few steps away from the web of chains, there was enough light filtering through that he could finally see what they held back. The pile of bones, thrice as tall as he was and wider than that, gleaming in the ambient light as if polished. The bones were large, far too large for any animal he could think of, and there didn't seem to be any proper order in which one laid against another. And was it his imagination, or did the bone pile just shift slightly? "It's been sleeping a long time. It was hurt pretty badly, and it's taken all this time to get better. Soon, though, it'll wake up." She turned to him and smiled softly. For a flash, he thought he saw an expression on her face that hinted of unfathomable age and weariness, then it was gone, and she was an innocent-looking little girl again. She reached her arms out and, after a moment, he obliged and hugged her. The day was really fun Ani-chan. She breathed into his ear, I left you a present so that I wouldn't be so bored. I'll see you again soon, but right now you have to. He jerked awake suddenly, losing his balance as he did so and tumbling off his bed. Cursing under his breath, the young boy picked himself up only for a wave of nausea to overwhelm him as he tried to focus his eyes in the pitch blackness of his small apartment. Staggering to the bathroom while avoiding various obstacles, he only just made it before the nausea became overwhelming and he was forced to violently dispose of last night's dinner into the toilet. Pulling himself up to the sink while balancing on wobbly jelly-like legs, the boy gargled out the taste of bile with several cups of water before giving his face a good washing. When he finally felt somewhat human, he raised his head to look at himself in the bathroom mirror. It was then that two eyes, reflected in the mirror's surface, met his own. One of them was not his. And he screamed. Hokage-sama. Sarutobi Hiruzen was off his bed in a defensive crouch with kunai in hand before the words were finished. As old as he was, far past the age when ninja typically retired from active duty, he was not known as the god of shinobi for nothing. It took him the length of one heartbeat to identify the voice and recall the assignment the voice's owner was supposed to be undertaking at this time. What is it, Hebe? Is there something wrong with Naruto? The ambush shifted uneasily before responding, an action Sarutobi picked up on. For one as casually outspoken as Hebe, this was a significant tell. 5 minutes ago I heard Uzumaki scream. When I broke in to investigate I found him huddled in the bathroom and well you need to see it Hokage-sama. I flagged Nico down to watch his apartment and came as soon as I could. Is he hurt? Is he in danger? Sarutobi was already throwing robes on his nightclothes. I don't know. Sarutobi threw open his bedroom window and was out in a flash, Hebe following close behind. Seconds later the pair joined a cat-masked Anbu on the roof of an abandoned warehouse facing Naruto's apartment. Has anything changed? No, Hokage-sama. It's been quiet. Stay here, both of you. Without waiting for acknowledgement of his order, Sarutobi made his way inside Naruto's small apartment. Guided by the single light in the apartment, he made his way through the disorganized mess that was Naruto's daily life and found the boy. Naruto? He asked gently. The young blonde did not respond. He was huddled in a corner against the toilet, face in his hands, whimpering. Reaching Naruto with a few soft steps, Sarutobi knelt down and put a calming hand on his shoulder. The boy jerked as if trying to get away. Naruto? What's wrong? Nothing. Sarutobi tried again. Naruto? Look at me. Whatever's going on, I can help you. Slowly, hesitantly, the young blonde moved his hands. Sarutobi firmed his grip on the boy's shoulder slightly, trying to give him a bit of mental support. Then Naruto turned, face streaked with tears, to look at the Hokage. Sarutobi's blood ran cold. Naruto's right eye, normally azure and full of depth, was now dull and glassy. But where his left eye once was, the one he had lost a year ago, a two-toned red orb, stared back at the shocked Hokage. Even as he struggled to understand the situation, part of Sarutobi's mind was already racing through the hand seals the fourth had used in sealing the Kyuubi, preparing for the possibility. Unconsciously the hand on Naruto's shoulder, meant to reassure, tightened so much that it caused the boy to wince. The expression of pain on Naruto's face brought Sarutobi out of his mental shock. When did this happen? How? Tell me. Words tumbled out of the boy's mouth in a jumble at the Hokage's unintentionally harsh query. I don't know, I was dreaming and there was this girl and this thing and we were playing and then I woke up and threw up and then I looked in the mirror and saw. Sarutobi considered the next step. He had not felt even a wisp of killing intent through all this and having lived through the Kyuubi's attack, he knew very well just how terrifying the beast's aura was. Back then it had been like an almost palpable miasma of dread, but all he sensed from Naruto now was fear and confusion. The tears, the scratch marks around Naruto's left eye, and his confused reply also weighed against the possibility of the Kyuubi having taken over the boy. But he couldn't take chances, not with Konoha's safety potentially on the line, and not with something that could turn out to be so wrong. Squeezing Naruto's shoulders once again, Sarutobi said firmly but kindly, I'll be right back, don't move. He quickly made his way back outside to the waiting Anbu and gave his orders, tone betraying none of the sadness and doubt he was feeling. Hebe, go get Ibiki and have him meet us at Anbu headquarters. I also want their most secure long-term detainment cell prepared. Nico, get me a full Anbu prisoner transport squad, maximum security. Watching the two Anbu speed off to carry out their orders, Sarutobi pushed all doubt aside in his mind. He had come to consider Naruto as something like an adopted grandchild, but his duty as Hokage came first. He only hoped that what he feared would not come to pass and that if it did not, Naruto would find some way to forgive him for what he was about to put the boy through. Sarutobi watched somberly as three people filed quietly into his office. 2 months ago, he had handpicked these three, plus one other, as the only individuals allowed to interact with Uzumaki Naruto, currently locked in a holding cell deep in the bowels of Anbu headquarters. A handful of Anbu knew of Naruto's status, but never got any closer than guarding his cell from the end of the hallway. The village council and the general population were simply told that Naruto was seriously ill and being held in quarantine at the hospital. Sarutobi had not even allowed himself to visit Naruto in order to preclude any possibility of himself being mentally influenced by the boy's new eye in some way. He had to remind himself every day that this was not only for Konoha's safety, but in the long run also for Naruto's own good. The day the three were to report on their findings and recommendations. Taking their cue from the Hokage's demeanor, the three took seats and watched in silence as he first dismissed his guards and then activated the privacy seals that were built into his office. For his part, Sarutobi found himself excited for news of the young blonde he regarded so fondly, but apprehensive of what he might hear as well. We all know why we're gathered here. Why don't we start with you, Sanzanin-sensei? Yes, Hokage-sama. Konoha Hospital's chief of medicine opened a folder and shuffled a few papers around before continuing. I personally put the subject through every diagnostic test I could think of, including taking several biopsies of various parts of the eye for further examination. It was during the course of taking samples that I discovered the eye heals remarkably quickly. Essentially, it would completely heal itself as soon as I finished any procedure. But the subject's approval, I tested his other eye and other parts of his body and found that the enhanced healing rate is limited to his left eye only. Sanzanin shuffled a piece of paper to the bottom of the folder's stack before resuming. After evaluating all test results, I am of the opinion that, aside from the enhanced healing and a few other details, the subject's left eye is essentially a normal human eye. I can't speculate as to the process by which the subject regenerated his lost eye, but I can't detect any chakra traces besides the subject's own in the eye. It may be a one-time effect of being the Kyuubi's container with no other side effects, or it may be the effect of some unknown bloodline limit. Sarutobi quirked a brow. Other details. I also ran a series of tests to study how well the eye performs, in conjunction with Yamanaka-san, to ensure that the subject wasn't hiding anything in his answers. With his right eye only, the subject has normal visual acuity for someone of his age. With the left eye only or with both eyes though, he has slightly improved vision, both in terms of ability to focus on distant objects and ability to track movement. The eye also gives him an easier time in seeing through minor genjutsu, though it's not better than what a decent genin with some field experience could do unaided. The Hokage nodded. Morino-san. Uzumaki has been cooperative throughout his stay. He's unhappy about his situation, but he seems to understand the necessity of it. After his first week of incarceration, he asked for academy textbooks and a practice sword. Seeing no danger to it, I supplied the first and provided a rubber version of the latter, and he's been busy occupying his time between interrogation and testing sessions that way. His choice in how to keep himself busy shows good judgment, and after the past 2 months in what is mostly solitary confinement, he's displaying more mental stability than most others would. Does he pose a danger to Konoha? I think Hibiki paused, mentally constructing his reply with care. I think given what we know of his childhood, I would not be surprised if he felt less attachment to Konoha than others of his age to begin with. But I do not believe that his current situation has affected how he feels about the village. Sarutobi nodded. It was a good answer, all things considered. He turned to the final member of the group. Yamanaka-san. What are your thoughts on Uzumaki Naruto's mental state? Aside from assisting Sanzanin-sensei in his medical diagnosis, I've entered Uzumaki's mind several times on my own. I could not find any trace of the Kyuubi, but given the complex and undocumented nature of the seal the fourth used, it may not mean anything. I was also unable to find any trace of the little girl that Uzumaki reported in his dreams the night of the incident. All in all, his mindscape is a dark and gloomy place, but not beyond what would be expected for an orphan with the kind of childhood he's led. And your opinion on whether he's a threat to Konoha's safety? I agree with Morino-san. I don't believe he's any more dangerous now than he was 2 months ago. I think given his determination to train himself even while incarcerated, I think he would make a useful addition to Konoha's shinobi ranks. That answer surprised Sarutobi. Inoichi had become patriarch of the Yamanaka clan after the death of several elder clan members during Kyuubi's attack, and his hostility to the Kyuubi's container was apparent to all who had eyes to see. Of the three currently seated before him, Inoichi was the only one who had harbored a real grudge against Naruto, and the Hokage had reluctantly chosen him to be part of Naruto's examination team based on the man's skill with his clan's mind-probing abilities. It seems then that with supervision, it would be safe to allow Uzumaki Naruto to return to his academy studies with the possibility of promotion to genin status. Sarutobi offered. He looked around the room and was met with three heads nodding in agreement. The eye's Genjutsu detection abilities may be more useful than Sanzanin Sensei's initial diagnosis suggests, Inoichi added, we're dealing with a pre-genin academy student with no practical experience in the field of Genjutsu. With experience and training, it may be possible for Uzumaki's eye to break through higher-level Genjutsu instinctively. In any case, I suggest that he be instructed to keep it covered in normal situations and only reveal it as an ace card. Similar to Hada Kakashi and his Sharingan, Sarutobi agreed. Very well, thank you for your work and cooperation in this matter. Sanzanin Sensei, please arrange the hospital's records and schedules to make it appear as if Naruto's been discharged. Marino-san, please release Naruto from the holding cell and get him settled back into normal life as best you can. Yamanaka-san, a moment please. The Hokage watched the two men leave and close the door and then reactivated his office's privacy seals. He then turned his eyes to the Yamanaka patriarch, studying the man's facial expression for a few moments before speaking. May I ask, Inoichi-kun, why did your opinion of Naruto change? Hokage-sama. Your dislike of Naruto as the Kyuubi's vessel is well known to me. It was only my faith in your great sense of personal honor that persuaded me you would not have taken this assignment as an opportunity to do Naruto harm. But now it seems you've had something of a change of heart regarding the boy. Inoichi shifted in his seat uncomfortably. I expected him to put up more of a fight when I told him I had to read his memories, but once I told him you had ordered it, he understood and was very cooperative. What I found in his mind was two great overriding themes. Ibiki was right when he said that Naruto doesn't have much in the way of ties to Konoha, but what I found was an intense personal loyalty to you, Hokage-sama, along with an incredible determination to fulfill the promise he made to you when he woke from his coma. I also looked back through his childhood, and well, I never really gave much thought to what it meant for so many villagers to bear a grudge against him, but it's a different perspective experiencing it from the eyes of a child who had no idea why everyone hated him. It's complicated, I'm still not sure how I feel, but I'm making an effort to see him not as the Kyuubi, but as a child whose life has been affected by things he has no control over, Inoichi finished lamely. Sarutobi gave the younger man a weary smile. It does seem like nothing regarding Uzumaki Naruto is ever simple. But I'm glad that he's finally starting to change people's opinions of him. I only hope that, one person at a time, he can eventually be seen the way the fourth wanted. Thank you for agreeing to do this, Inoichi-kun. Yamanaka Inoichi stood and gave the Hokage a respectful bow before turning and walking out of the older man's office. Naruto landed heavily on his back for the third time that day. "Get up, dope, we're not done," Sasuke sneered. Naruto grunted as he clumsily maneuvered back to his feet, left hand on his face the whole time. He didn't have the skill to take Sasuke out cleanly, and there wasn't enough time left on the clock to stage a comeback via points scored. But he'd be damned if he didn't give his all against the arrogant bastard to the bitter end. The day had started off well for the blonde-haired boy. It was academy graduation day, and he had set his alarm clock an hour early just to be sure he could get some last-minute studying and warm-ups in. Then he had opened his breakfast instant ramen to find the free case of ramen winning label printed on the inside. Money was no longer a major issue in Naruto's life ever since he started shopping in his one-eyed Jounin disguise. He'd even been able to buy a pair of explosive tags from the weapon shop with his savings. But winning free ramen was always a cause for celebration. The Genin exams went the way Naruto had expected them to. The extra studying he put in had caught him up with his classmates academically, and he managed to do reasonably well with the written portion of the exam. He was decent with Henge and less so with Bunshin, but was relieved when Iruka-sensei told him that he had just barely squeaked by passing level in the jutsu portion of the exam. His thrown weapons performance was poor, which he had expected, but he had put in enough practice that he managed to hit the target with one kunai above the number required for passing. And then Naruto was matched against Uchiha Sasuke for the Taijutsu portion of the exam. While Naruto no longer made Taijutsu a priority in his personal training, his intense physical conditioning regimen had still brought him back up to around the middle of the class in terms of Taijutsu ability. The top fighters of the class like Sasuke and Inuzuka Kiba still beat him in every practice match, but lately he had begun to put forward a credible level of opposition against even them. Thus while Naruto was not confident of his chances for winning when he stepped into the practice circle against Sasuke, he still felt he could do well enough to pass the Genin exam overall. The match began the same way as the last dozen or so matches they'd had during classes. Naruto had noticed Sasuke's tendency of opening with a kick followed by a hand combination and managed to block them all while scoring a glancing kick of his own. Then he'd misread a kick feint to the midsection and dropped his arms, only to take a spinning backfist against the left side of his face. Sasuke had then grabbed and pulled the headband covering his eye right off of him. Naruto just had time to clamp his left hand over his eye just before a kick combination drove him to the ground for the first time. "Why don't you come at me with both hands? Too ashamed of showing everyone your ugly scar?" Sasuke smirked while making a taunting come here motion with his front hand. Naruto no longer cared whether his classmates thought he was ugly or not, but Gigi had impressed on him the importance of not letting anyone see his left eye. The academy examiners wouldn't allow him time to retie his headband, so he had no choice but to finish the fight with one hand clamped securely over his eye. As soon as the stop whistle sounded, Naruto grabbed his headband and stalked away angrily, ignoring the twittering laughter of the Sasuke fangirl club. He had heard the examiners openly laughing at him as Sasuke put him down again and again, he didn't need them to tell him that he had failed. 2 hours later, Naruto watched the gathering of happy parents and newly graduated genins from a bench partially hidden behind bushes at the back of the academy lot. He had worked out his disappointment and anger on a training post while the rest of his class finished with the testing and now was slumped down in his seat in a sense of empty tiredness. For a moment, he allowed his mind to wander, to picture himself as one of those happy children being congratulated by proud parents. "Congratulations, Naruto, I always knew you could do it. Thanks dad, the tips you gave me about that jutsu were really useful. Come on, I'll make you your favorite dishes for dinner." "Yay. Mom, can I invite my best friend too?" Naruto quashed his daydream viciously. They never led his mind to anywhere good. "Naruto?" a kindly voice asked. He turned to find himself looking at Mizuki. The academy instructor had seated himself beside Naruto while the boy was lost in his daydream. "Are you feeling okay? I heard you failed the Taijutsu portion of the exam." "Yeah," the boy replied simply. "It's too bad. I know you worked really hard for this, I was sure you could pass this time around." Naruto shrugged. "Yeah. Maybe next year." He hoped the tone of his voice didn't betray the bitter disappointment he felt. "Still, we both know you're ready. It would be a shame for you to spend another year at the academy when it was bad luck that made you fail the Taijutsu exam." Naruto turned to look at Mizuki and the academy instructor gave him a warm smile in return. "You know, there's another way you can pass the genin test. It's supposed to be a secret, but..." A hesitant voice interrupted the drudgery of his daily paperwork. "Gigi?" The third Hokage looked up and studied the young boy's face before him. He had expected happiness if Naruto passed the genin test. He had expected sadness or anger if Naruto failed. But he didn't expect the confused and guarded look the boy was presenting him now. "Naruto? Did something happen with the genin exam?" "I failed," Naruto replied after a moment's hesitation. "Taijutsu. Sasuke pulled my headband off and I spent the fight covering my eye." Sarutobi nodded at Naruto sympathetically. In many ways, after his daughter had died in childbirth with her unborn child, the blonde had grown to become the grandchild the Hokage never had. Over the years, spending so much time with the boy, Sarutobi had learned to read the nuances of his expressions quite well. "I see, but that's not why you're here." "Well, it's just that Mizuki-sensei said something that seems suspicious, but I don't want to get him in trouble," Naruto replied. "Perhaps you should tell me what he said. It might be something innocent after all." "He said that there was another way I could pass the genin exam. He said if I could get a scroll of forbidden jutsu from your residence and bring it to him at the 25th training ground tonight, that it would prove that I had the skill to be a genin and could pass the test." The Hokage's eyes narrowed. He knew exactly which scroll the boy was referring to. Either Mizuki was playing a very cruel joke on Naruto or Sarutobi was quite old by any standard and was physically nowhere near his prime. But his mind was sharp as it had ever been. His hand absently activated the privacy seals of his office as his mind threw a plan together in the space of a few seconds. The most important thing was protecting the scroll because it contained some of the most powerful and dangerous jutsu to have been used by any Konoha shinobi. But it was just as important to ascertain Mizuki's true intentions. And if possible, Sarutobi wanted to help Naruto on his path of becoming a ninja. "Naruto, I don't know what Mizuki's after, but there's no such alternative method for passing the genin test." Seeing Naruto's expression drop slightly, Sarutobi continued, "This is something that may be more important than the genin test though, and I need your help with it. Would you be willing to?" "Of course." The boy replied without hesitation. As much as not passing the genin exam hurt, he knew that the Hokage would not use such words lightly. Mizuki may simply be trying to play a trick on you, or it may be something worse. Either way, I want you to do what he says and steal the scroll from my residence tonight. I'll arrange guard shifts to give you an easier time and have some Anbu trailing you so that you'll have backup against Mizuki in case it's not a trick. Do you understand what I'm asking of you?" Naruto considered the Hokage's words for several seconds before nodding and then said quietly, "I won't let you down, Gigi." Sarutobi smiled fondly at the boy before him, reaching across the desk to ruffle his hair. "I know. Now go do whatever it is you do when you plan your pranks. But don't start anything until the sun sets." He watched as Naruto walked out of his office and pulled the doors closed. As soon as the door latch clicked into place, the smile dropped from his face. He turned to the Anbu bodyguard hidden behind a false panel of his office. "At Miyabiki and Anko." Sarutobi Hiruzen listened absently as the group before him bickered back and forth. He was supposed to mediate the debate and be the final arbiter of all decisions, but his mind was on other matters at the moment. The night's meeting had gotten off to a rough start. In a minor act of divinity, the habitually late Hada Kakashi managed to show up only half an hour after the scheduled time. Unfortunately, some of the academy staff and Jounin instructors had counted so much on Kakashi's chronic tardiness that they were out drinking in celebration of another academy year until half an hour after that. Once all parties were settled in, discussions had begun on how to allocate the 29 academy graduates into three-person teams. It was an extraordinary number, amongst the highest the academy had ever graduated since its founding. The first step was dividing the graduates into two groups. Those with some clan-based or other advantages that stood out and otherwise average children from civilian families. 7 clan offspring were sorted into the first group, plus one Haruno Sakura who, though from a civilian background, displayed remarkable intelligence by graduating at the top of the class academically. The 21 from the second group were then sorted into teams. First they were divided into close combat, ranged support, and ninjutsu support types based on academic evaluation. Then teams were constructed by assigning one of each type per team while taking graduating rank into account. Thus the best close combat specialist of the group would be teamed with 2 relatively poor performing members of the other specialties, while the worst ninjutsu specialist could count on having strong close combat and ranged support teammates. In this way the 7 teams constructed from children with civilian backgrounds were made as equal as possible while allowing for strong versatility within each team. An unspoken but widely acknowledged fact was that few children from this group would ever get beyond Chunin level, even with a great deal of effort on their part. Many of the current group of graduates would not even be able to pass their Jounin instructor's final genin tests and would find themselves back in the academy. Therefore it was felt that dividing children of civilian background in this way would give them the greatest chance of survival en route to a likely Chunin level desk job. It was during this process that a guard had rushed in to inform the Hokage of the break-in at his residence and that Naruto had been spotted leaving with a scroll. Sarutobi had left the academy staff and Jounin instructors to finish the process of dividing the civilian graduates while he sought the search for Naruto. He made sure to assign his best trackers far away from where Naruto would be and assigned Mizuki with a pair of inexperienced genin to search that particular area. Seeing Mizuki's admirable though not entirely successful job of masking his face of emotions, Sarutobi was assured that Mizuki would be able to find some way of ditching his teammates and meeting Naruto alone. Good. The Hokage returned to the conference room in time to find the group starting in on the other 8 graduates. Unlike civilian graduates, clan children with the potential for special abilities were a rare resource that needed to be cultivated in order for their full potential to develop properly. Team balance was taken into account, but so was compatibility of individual clan abilities, potential personality conflicts, as well as established bonds of friendship that could work to strengthen the team's cohesion. The Yamanaka, Nara, and Akimichi children were immediately grouped together. The team composed of their fathers had been amongst Konoha's most effective in their time, proving the synergistic strength of their clan abilities when working together. No one ever doubted, provided they all graduated together, that the current generation would be teamed as well. In fact, they were all born within a month of each other and Sarutobi wondered if their parents had conspired to that end as well. Sarutobi wasn't surprised when his son Asuma volunteered to take on the team as their Jounin instructor. He got along well with the elder Nara and by all accounts the son was a virtual copy of the father in terms of personality. There was also the fact that Asuma hadn't been allowed to smoke since the beginning of the meeting and was looking for any excuse to finish his involvement and step out early. 5 graduates were left to divide between Hada Kakashi and Yuuhi Kurenai's teams, meaning one would have a team of 2 genin. Kakashi had volunteered to lead Uchiha Sasuke's team, a logical match, given that he was the only one in the village with experience in using the Uchiha bloodline Sharingan. Then things had gotten complicated. I'm telling you, Uchiha Sasuke needs to be in the larger team. Of all the graduates he displays the least inclination towards teamwork. Yumino Iruka insisted. He's the rookie of the year, another academy instructor countered, putting him in the 3-person team will leave the other one much weaker. What if we put the 2 weakest with Sasuke then, that Haruno girl and someone else? Kakashi offered. Sarutobi glanced down at the academy results spread out before him. Haruno Sakura's formidable intellect and chakra control were both at the top of the class, but she had not done well in the practical aspects of academy instruction. The girl was near the bottom of the class Taijutsu, below average in thrown weapons, and tended to perform poorly in field exercises. For some reason, one of her instructors had also scribbled in the margin of her records that a reason for being a ninja is to impress Sasuke-kun, and that despite her stated reason, she tended to perform poorly when grouped with him. He closed his eyes and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The girl had great potential, but only with the proper nurturing and guidance from a very good instructor, and only if she found some proper motivation for her chosen career. And though Kakashi had a well-deserved reputation as one of the most elite of Konoha shinobi, proper nurturing and guidance of someone like this girl was not one of his skills. Not even close. No, he decided, it would not be a good idea to put the girl in the same group as the Uchiha. It would effectively stunt her growth as a ninja. Keeping to the theme of one female graduate to each team, Sarutobi asked, what about Hyuga Hinata instead? I'm surprised that her academy records show her as having average Taijutsu. She's actually quite a bit more skilled than her academy records show, Iruka replied, but she has some confidence issues that have held her back when her performance is being evaluated. There's another thing though. The Hokage nodded, indicating that Iruka should continue. She's formed a close friendship with Inyazuka Kiba over the last year, and his encouragement has given her more confidence in her own abilities lately. It's my strong recommendation that the two of them be assigned to the same team. Sarutobi pondered the dilemma before him. The Hyuga bloodline was one of the most potent Konoha possessed, and if all it took to improve this girl's performance significantly was pairing her with her friend, then that was the sensible thing to do. On the other hand, that would make the whole issue of team balance more complicated. Teaming Hyuga Hinata and Inyazuka Kiba with the last Uchiha would be a good way to work on the boys' teamwork, as members of the Inyazuka clan were quite well known for their pack-oriented nature and ability to cooperate in groups. But that would leave the other team with Aburame Shino and the Haruno girl. Shino would undoubtedly be a great scout and competent support fighter with his family abilities, but according to his academy record, his Taijutsu was just above average. Haruno, for all her theoretical potential, was at present not much better than a civilian. That would make for a very understrength team. Swapping the two pairs around would make for more balanced teams. Sarutobi had already identified the problems with putting the Haruno girl in the same team as the Uchiha, and Aburame Shino was, according to his academy instructor's notes, as reserved and standoffish as the rest of his clan if not more so. In a team together, he could not see how three individuals with such personality mismatches could develop teamwork in any meaningful manner. Sarutobi came to a decision. With only one Uchiha left in Konoha, it was necessary to nurture him carefully so the clan could be re-established. He would put the boy together with the Hyuga and Inyazuka. The other team would be put on probationary status until a close combat specialist was found to round them out, either from the next year's academy graduates or from an already established genin team disbanding. He only hoped that Kurenai wouldn't be too disappointed. Okazama, it looks like you have one more genin graduate. Sarutobi looked up to see the conference room's doors burst open, allowing a broadly grinning Mitarashi Anko into the room, flanked by an apologetic-looking Chunin who had been guarding the doors outside. One of the academy instructors scowled at her borderline indecent appearance, clad as she was in her typical attire of tan trench coat, fishnet, and not much else. Anko always insisted that it was body-hugging chainmail, though the Hokage couldn't see how it would protect her from anything. It's alright, I expected her, Sarutobi said as he waved a hand to dismiss the Chunin guard. Now please tell us what happened, Anko. Mizuki from the academy had turned traitor, Hokage-sama, Anko replied. He's with Ibiki now. I managed to track Uzumaki Naruto down at training ground 25 and then watched from concealment as Mizuki turned up and revealed that he had tricked the kid into thinking that stealing the scroll of forbidden jutsu would allow him to pass the genin exams. Sarutobi nodded. It was the story he had pre-arranged with Ibiki and Anko when he sent them out on this secret assignment. He didn't know if Mizuki was working with anyone else and it was best not to lay all his cards on the table yet. Why did you say that we have one more genin graduate though? Naruto failed today's test because of the Taijutsu portion, right? 10 minutes ago he just took Mizuki down one-on-one, I didn't even have to intervene. I'd say that more than qualifies him for genin status. Impossible. One of the academy instructors barked, Uzumaki's Taijutsu is below average. There's no way he could have beaten the academy's Taijutsu instructor. Anko simply grinned even more broadly and cocked her head to one side in reply. The kid had done it by himself alright. It didn't matter what tricks or weapons he used, results were what counted for active duty shinobi. Sarutobi smiled. A number of his problems had been solved for him in one stroke. Very well then, it looks like we can now field two full teams. Kakashi, I'd like you to take Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Hinata, and Inyazuka Kiba for your team. The Inyazuka pack mentality will be a good lesson in teamwork for the Uchiha and make sure that the Hyuga girl continues to build her confidence. Seeing the masked Jounin nod, he turned to Yuhi Kurenai. Kurenai, your team will be Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto. Does anyone have any problems with the team assignments? Seeing no objections, the Hokage moved to end the meeting. The meeting is over then, thank you all for your hard work. Iruka, please file the necessary paperwork and see to it that Uzumaki Naruto gets a hit I-8 in time for tomorrow. Anko, Kurenai, come with me please. Striding purposefully out of the conference room and upstairs to the Hokage office, Saratobi waited until the two female jounin had followed him in and seated themselves, then dismissed his guard and activated his office's privacy seals before seating himself. Clasping his fingers together and putting them against his chin contemplatively, he mentally sorted through the things that needed to be covered in the coming conversation. He had chosen Kurenai to be Naruto's jounin instructor because, as one of the very rare shinobi who had risen from a civilian background to elite jounin status, she had not lost any family members to the Kyuubi's attack. Her Chunin team had also been on extended assignment outside Konoha when the attack occurred. The woman had never displayed any negative feelings towards Naruto, but he needed to be sure. First, Kurenai-san, I'd like you to tell me what you know about Uzumaki Naruto. I don't really know that much about him, beyond what's commonly known. Please indulge me. Well, I know he's an orphan, and no one knows who his parents are. He used to be a holy terror around town with the pranks he pulled. Though I have to say, some of the more elaborate ones were quite interesting, from a planning and execution viewpoint. Someone attacked him 2 or 3 years ago, I heard he lost an eye and spent some time in the hospital. After that I don't recall seeing him around the village much at all. I'm actually somewhat surprised he managed to beat Mizuki at all, let alone one-eyed. How did he manage to do that, Anko? It was quite a fight, Hokage-sama, the trench-coated ninja exhibitionist replied. The kid set up a double explosive tag trap where the first explosion would also drop the second tag down on a wire and modified that one to have a longer delay. He got Mizuki to chase him to where he'd set the trap up and the first one exploded when the bastard was by the tree it was stuck on. Mizuki managed to pull back and avoid any real damage though. Saratobi nodded. Explosive tags were costly to produce and were no more than nuisances to shinobi of mid-chunin rank or higher. They were typically sold to starry-eyed genin for their visual impact, who did not yet realize just how difficult it was to cause any major injuries to seasoned ninja with tags. That was just the first part of the Naruto's trap though. He set up a bunshin to charge through the explosive smoke while he circled around and attacked Mizuki from the back. Mizuki saw through the bunshin and turned just in time to see the tag that had dropped on a wire behind him explode in his face. He managed to mostly shield himself from the second explosion and punched the second Naruto, but that one was a bunshin too. The two explosions rattled Mizuki enough that he didn't notice. That was when the real Naruto jumped out of the bushes with a wooden sword and swung down on the traitor's punching arm. Naruto's wordplay is rough, but he's got good instinctive sense, and with Mizuki having a broken arm, it was just a matter of time before the kid took him down. Saratobi couldn't help but chuckle at Naruto's multi-layered trap. It seemed that Naruto was able to apply his prank planning abilities to the type of situations he would face as a ninja. Hokage-sama, if I may ask, has Naruto been training with a sword for long? Is that why his academy Taijutsu evaluations are poor? Kurenai ventured. Almost 2 years now, I think, Saratobi replied. He explained it to me by saying that a sword's increased reach could keep opponents from taking advantage of his blind side. And that if they ever got close enough, a sword slash can attack a large area around him without needing sight on target. When he told me I gave him some scrolls to learn from, basics and sword theory mostly. Kurenai nodded thoughtfully. That an academy student could find a solution to his personal weaknesses on his own and then independently train that skill without showing it for 2 years. You'll find that Naruto is quite determined to improve himself. In fact, his extended hospitalizations kept him away from the academy for nearly 8 months, meaning that he effectively made up a year's worth of academy instruction on his own. Kurenai's eyebrows arched at this, she hadn't known that Naruto had been hospitalized for quite that long. In that case, still managing to graduate with his age peers despite having been out of the academy so long. Kurenai shuffled through some of Naruto's academy reports in her hands, glancing through them. He has a lot more potential than his academy instructors have realized. Indeed, and I'm counting on you to help him realize that potential. I'll do my best, Hokage-sama. Good. Saratobi smiled at the red-eyed woman. Now, what I'm about to tell you is known by exactly 6 people, and you'll be the 7th. Naruto, myself, Ibiki and Anko, Yamanaka and Oichi, and Chief of Medicine Sanzen and Yasushi. This is a secret you must keep at all costs, unless Naruto chooses to disclose it himself. Do you understand? Kurenai glanced at Anko before nodding, trying to think of what the secret might be. It obviously applied to Naruto, and given the involvement of both the Yamanaka clan patriarch and the hospital chief of medicine, it was likely something to do with Naruto's mental health. Did he have a split personality or something? The Hokage reached down and unlocked one of the secret compartments of his desk, pulling out a folder and passing it to Kurenai. This file will give you more detail on what I'm about to tell you. I'd like you to take it with you and read it tonight. You can return it tomorrow morning, make sure no one else sees it. Saratobi watched as the young jounin pulled the folder close to her, where it seemingly disappeared into the complex patterns of black and white body-hugging ribbons that Kurenai's normal uniform appeared to be made out of. About a year after Naruto lost his left eye, he spontaneously developed a replacement, except this eye has a red iris around a dark red pupil. The second period of extended hospitalization in his official records was actually spent in an Anbu holding cell. He spent 2 months there until it was determined that this didn't pose a threat to Konoha. Ever since then I've told him to keep the eye hidden at all times, except in very specific life or death situations where it might prove to be an advantage. Given his background, you'll understand why I went to such lengths. The Hokage didn't need to elaborate. Kurenai was very much aware of how many villagers saw Naruto as being the Kyuubi reincarnated. If they suddenly saw him with an abnormal red eye, the results wouldn't be pretty. It was ironic that she herself went about Konoha with no problems at all with 2 eyes like that, although hers were just a quirk of family genetics. After extensive examinations, it was determined that the eye gives him slightly better vision than normal and also gives him an easier time seeing through minor genjutsu. Yamanaka-san is of the opinion that this is an ability that might be improved on with some effort. That was one of the reasons I chose to put him on your team. Once he's comfortable with you as a jounin instructor, you could suggest to him ways of exploring the eye's potential and seeing if there's any way to train it. Yes, Hokage-sama. If I may ask though, can you tell me where the eye came from? Is it a byproduct of being the Kyuubi's vessel or is it something else? We weren't able to determine that, though Sanzanin-sensei and Yamanaka-sen were satisfied that neither the eye nor Naruto's mind bear any traces of Kyuubi interference. Sanzanin-sensei speculated that it may be a manifestation of some unknown bloodline limit, as we don't know anything about Naruto's parentage, Sarutobi replied. It wasn't entirely factual, but it was truth that no one knew much about the background of the boy's mother. This isn't the first time I've said it, and I'm sure this won't be the last, Sarutobi continued, but it seems as if nothing with Uzumaki Naruto is ever easy. For now just keep it in mind when you deal with the boy and report to me directly if there are any new developments. Now, if you have no other questions, the both of you are dismissed. Kurenai left the Hokage's office distractedly, thinking about the genin that made up her new team, while her body moved itself out of the building automatically. The Hokage didn't say anything outright, but someone with Naruto's childhood and circumstances would more likely than not have some emotional issues that would need to be addressed. Aburame Shino on the other hand was probably the easiest to deal with of the three. He was competent though unexceptional in all basic areas of shinobi skill, though if he was anything like the rest of his reserved clan, it would be a challenge to get him interacting normally with the rest of his team. Haruno Sakura had her share of problems as well, if her academy evaluations were any indication. Kurenai was quite familiar with fangirl behavior from her own academy and genin days, and in her experience, those who didn't let go of their fangirl mindset quickly after graduation tended to find their kunoichi careers cut short quite abruptly. The lucky ones were those who simply couldn't handle the reality of shinobi life and dropped out altogether. There was also the matter of molding the three of them into an effective team. Kurenai was so distracted by her thoughts that she didn't notice Anko following her until the younger Takebetsu Jounin jerked her out of her ruminations by energetically throwing an arm around her shoulder. Yes Anko, Kurenai sighed, I have sake at home. Excellent. Anko proclaimed. You can ask me anything you want about the kid while I get sloshed. The Hokage had me pulled from regular duties to be the kid's jailer for 2 months. As Anko followed her home singing some sexual innuendo-filled drinking song, Kurenai couldn't help but reflect back on the strange set of circumstances that had ended up with them becoming friends. Anko was loud, brash, and often rude. But for all her faults, she was utterly dependable when it mattered. The demanding life of an active duty shinobi did not always allow one to choose their own friends, but Kurenai knew that she could have done far worse than someone like Mitarashi Anko. Naruto sat in a corner of the academy classroom, reading a scroll he'd brought with him while trying to ignore the curious glances of his soon-to-be ex-classmates. His thrashing at the hands of the Uchiha bastard and subsequent failure of the Taijutsu exam had been witnessed by many of his classmates, so more than a few of them were wondering why he was sitting in the classroom that was supposed to be for graduating genin only. No one had actually come up to ask him though. Oi Naruto, why are you here? Today's meeting is for graduates only. Until now. Naruto didn't reply to Shikamaru, opting to continue with his reading while he simply pointed at the hit I-8 that was laid out on the desk in front of him. He knew that the pineapple-headed boy would find it too troublesome to press him for a verbal explanation if he didn't offer one first. Shikamaru slouched off to find a free seat, but as he left Naruto caught the word the other boy had mumbled. Troublesome. Several minutes later Naruto was startled from his reading when the classroom door was thrown open with a resounding bang. A glance up at the door showed Haruno Sakura and Yamanaka Ino simultaneously trying to struggle through the door past each other, followed by both of them squeezing through at the same time. Then the bickering began about who had made it in first and thus who got to sit next to Sasuke. Naruto rubbed at his temple, trying to tune the two out. In the final exchange last night, Mizuki had managed to land a spinning kick against the side of his head that left his vision swimming and ears ringing before his instinctive counterstroke had put the traitor down for good. Now the screeching was threatening to bring his headache from last night back in full force. Naruto couldn't help but grimace and close his eye tightly as some of the other girls who'd arrived earlier joined in to insist that they should be the ones to sit next to Sasuke. His hearing, and possibly his sanity, was saved when the classroom door opened again. This time it was Academy Instructor Yumino Ruka, team assignment rosters in hand. Aburame Shino sat on the roof of the academy, legs dangling over the edge, bento open but practically untouched on his lap. Only his closest relatives would be able to tell from the slight changes in his carefully guarded demeanor, but Shino was annoyed. When he enrolled in the academy, Shino had decided, after consulting with his father, to place less emphasis on taijutsu training in favor of working with the Kakeichu insects that were the foundation of his clan's unique abilities. It was a rational decision at the time. Increased expertise with his clan's abilities would allow his eventual genin team a number of tactical options that no one else in his year group could provide, while his taijutsu shortcomings could be overcome by being teamed with someone who was a close combat specialist. Until the day he graduated from the academy, Shino had seen no reason to regret his decision. Like most of the Aburame clan, he was taller and heavier than his peers, and his ability to take advantage of those attributes made him an above-average fighter compared to the rest of the class. Given the relatively small amount of time he devoted to taijutsu practice, Shino felt that was a satisfactory outcome. He was questioning the wisdom of that decision now. He had been teamed with Haruno Sakura, who, along with Hyuga Hinata, he had carefully monitored for the last 2 years of their academy classes. His father had once led a genin team, and from some of the clues the elder Aburame had dropped, it was not difficult for Shino to figure out the general principles behind genin team placement. Given the male-to-female ratio of his academy class and the potential of a reborn Ino Shikacho team, it was obvious that he would be placed with either Sakura or Hinata. Shino greatly respected the girl's intellectual capability, her nearly perfect record in academy written tests was evidence enough of that. But she was also nearly if not outright the worst of their peers in taijutsu. From the way her skills had developed so slowly since he'd started watching her, he suspected that she put no effort into physical training outside of class time. The third member of their team was the boy who some of their classmates had taken to calling the dead last, Uzumaki Naruto. That label wasn't entirely without justification. Naruto had barely passed most of the graduation examinations and had failed the taijutsu portion outright. Still, Shino knew that academy records did not paint a complete picture when it came to Naruto. Between his 2 extended hospitalizations, the blonde had essentially missed out on a year of schooling and yet had managed to graduate on time with the rest of his age peers. This was a sign of remarkable talent or initiative and should have been encouraged, yet many of the academy instructors seemed to take delight in ignoring Naruto whenever they could. Shino well remembered how frail and sickly the blonde looked on his first day back to classes a year and a half ago. His poor physical condition, combined with their classmates learning to take advantage of his blind side, had quickly dropped Naruto to the bottom of the class in taijutsu. Then, over the course of the next year and a half, Naruto had managed to claw his way back to the middle of the pack. Shino had to admit that Naruto's climb back up the rankings impressed him, it spoke of great determination on the blonde boy's part. Yet for all that effort, Shino was still able to beat him in practice more often than not. Then there was the matter of Naruto's taijutsu exam. Shino, engaged in his own match at the time, was one of the few who did not see Naruto's fight with Sasuke. What he had managed to gather later was that Sasuke had accidentally pulled the blonde boy's headband off during the match, and Naruto lost because he kept one hand over his face the rest of the fight to cover up his facial scarring. Shino did not know Naruto well, but he had difficulty imagining that the boy who had worked so hard over the last 2 years would have been willing to risk failing the graduation test over vanity. He had failed the taijutsu exam though, and thus didn't meet the requirements for genin graduation. But today he was a genin anyway. There was no official explanation, but what Shino managed to overhear in the Aburame clan compound indicated that Naruto was allowed to graduate because he had defeated Mizuki without help. Naruto, who had difficulty fighting academy classmate Shino, had managed to defeat a Chunin close combat specialist who taught taijutsu in the academy. It simply didn't make sense. Sighing and repacking his bento, Shino mentally set that problem aside. In the growing pile he had taken to labeling the mystery of Uzumaki Naruto. Lunch was almost over, and he had to return back to the classroom for the first meeting with the team's jounin instructor. Haruno Sakura ambled casually through the streets of Konoha, annoyance clearly visible on her face. After announcing the team assignments, Haruka had dismissed the class for lunch, with a reminder to return an hour later to meet their jounin instructors. As she was on a diet, Sakura chose to skip lunch, instead passing the time wandering around the village. Sakura couldn't understand why she had been put on a team with the dead last and the creepy bug boy. She knew her taijutsu wasn't very good, but she was academically at the top of her class, wasn't she? It makes more sense to have her on Sasuke-kun's team so their strengths could complement each other. Why hadn't the academy instructors seen such an obvious fact? Then there were her teammates. She sympathized with Naruto having lost an eye, but shouldn't he have learned to give up and find a civilian job where his handicap wouldn't hurt him so much? He had managed to produce a pair of sickly-looking bunshin during the jutsu portion of the exam and had passed by a hair. Then Sasuke-kun completely outclassed him during the taijutsu exam. Even she had beaten Naruto from time to time during practice. What use would the blonde boy be as part of the team? Sakura had to admit that, from academy readings that gave a brief overview of the abilities of Konoha's various major clans, that Shino could be useful in a team. But there was something just so wrong about having bugs in your body. She would just have to tell Shino to never use his bugs anywhere near her, or she'd beat him up. Turning around to retrace her steps, Sakura sighed as she made her way back to the academy. She really wasn't looking forward to working with her team. Even Ino Pig had managed to get a better team with Shikamaru and Choji. Lazy and fat she could deal with, but useless and creepy was just a bit too much for her. Naruto didn't bother with lunch. With all that had happened yesterday, he had forgotten about restocking groceries. Then in the morning, faced with his last cup of instant ramen, he had opted to eat it then, rather than saving it for lunch. Instead, Naruto made his way to the nearest training ground as quickly as he could. During Iruka's lecture about what it means to be a shinobi of the leaf, Naruto had mentally reviewed the final exchange between Mizuki and himself. He had come to the conclusion that he had stepped too far forward and overextended himself when trying a diagonal downward slash on Mizuki, and that was what provided the opening for the traitor to kick him. He wanted to physically test out his ideas before meeting with his Jounin instructor. Naruto didn't give much thought to his teammates. Gigi had pulled some strings to let him graduate, and for that he was grateful. He'd work with whoever they teamed him with and train as much as he could so that he could be a competent ninja. He had to repay the debt he owed the old man after all. Team 10. Akimichi Choji, Nara Shikamaru, and Yamanaka Ino, this is your Jounin instructor Sarutobi Asuma. Follow him out. The new Ino Shikacho team dutifully followed Asuma out of the classroom, though not without Ino giving Sasuke's back one last longing look. There were 7 left in the classroom now, the members of teams 7 and 8, plus Iruka. Naruto had once again buried himself in his reading, only peripherally paying attention to his surroundings. After returning from lunch, Shino had chosen to take the seat beside him and was now sitting as impassively as a statue. Sakura had taken the opportunity of other teams leaving to move to the now empty seat beside Sasuke and was trying to engage the black-haired boy in conversation. From what Naruto could tell, she would have had just as much success talking to a Sasuke wall poster. Naruto's eye was drawn to the door by the sound of it opening, and he was startled by what he saw. A kunoichi, presumably a Jounin instructor, walked through the door. She had black feathery hair that drifted down to her collarbones, and her uniform appeared to be a red sleeve attached to some odd assortment of black and white bandages that weaved around her body in some kind of pattern. What caught Naruto's attention, however, were the crimson irises of her eyes. Teammate. Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura, and Uzumaki Naruto, this is your Jounin instructor Yuuhi Kurenai, follow her out. Iruka's words brought Naruto back to his immediate surroundings, and he realized the Jounin instructor had seen him staring at her and was watching him in turn. He turned his eye downward and followed her out the door, brushing past Sakura when she turned to stare longingly at Sasuke before exiting the room. Kurenai waved for the 3 to follow her and then led them out of the academy and to the adjacent playground. Once there, she motioned for her students to sit down on some nearby logs before taking a seat facing them. Naruto had chosen to simply plop himself down on the log closest to where he was, while Shino sat on an adjacent log. Sakura had taken a detour to find a seat that would put Naruto between herself and Shino and also sat at the far edge of her log away from her new teammates. It also did not escape Kurenai's notice that Naruto was watching her with a carefully, almost deliberately, neutral expression. Since she knew Naruto's secret, it wasn't difficult to guess what he was thinking, so she decided to put the boy at ease. My red eyes are just a genetic quirk of the family, there's nothing special about them, Kurenai said with a smile towards him. The tension visible in his shoulders eased and his face relaxed slightly into a more natural expression. Now, Kurenai began, let's get to know each other so we can start off on the right foot as a team. Who you are, likes, dislikes, hobbies, goals for the future, that kind of thing. I'll start. My name is Yuuhi Kurenai and I'm a Jinjutsu specialist. I like drinking with my friends and coming up with interesting ways to use Jinjutsu. I dislike braggarts and people who think Jinjutsu isn't as useful as ninjutsu. My hobby is cooking, especially trying new recipes. My goal for the future is to make sure you all advance yourselves as shinobi safely and successfully. Kurenai turned her eyes to Shino, prompting him to take up the introductions. My name is Aburame Shino. I like studying insects and winter melon soup. I dislike loud people and strong-smelling foods. My hobby is collecting insects to add to my collection, and my goal for the future is to contribute new jutsu to my clan's library. Kurenai nodded, that was more or less what she expected from Shino. She turned to Sakura next. My name is Haruno Sakura. I like Sasu-kun and taking care of my hair. I dislike Ino Pig and annoying people. I like to spend time singing karaoke and watching movies, and my goal for the future is to become a great kunoichi, so Sasu-kun will recognize my worth. Kurenai nodded at Sakura's introduction, carefully masking her thoughts from her face. As she expected, Sakura would need a great deal of work. The girl's life revolved too much around her crush for her to be an effective shinobi. Setting those thoughts aside for the moment, Kurenai turned to the last member of her team. I'm Uzumaki Naruto. I like Hokage and training. I dislike people who look down on me. My hobby's music, and my goal for the future I don't really know. I promised Gigi that I would work hard to graduate, but now I guess my goal for the future is to become a chunin. Kurenai looked at the boy, trying to reconcile what she was seeing and hearing now, with a vague image of the boy she remembered from before he lost his eye. Back then his most immediate feature was the horribly ugly orange jumpsuit, which he had now replaced with a plain white t-shirt and grey cargo pants. Her eyes also picked out, partially hidden beneath the sleeves, chakra-enhanced arm and leg weights. They were of the type used by ninja for physical therapy and training, as chakra could be pumped into them to increase their weight far beyond what their physical size would suggest. The other thing she remembered of the boy was how some of the ninja she knew had laughed at his ambition of becoming Hokage then, and now there was no mention of that goal. Ninjutsu relied strongly on an understanding of human psychology to be effective, and Kurenai was better than most at the art. She came to the realization that social isolation lay at the root of Naruto's problems. The visually loud orange jumpsuit, the elaborate pranks, and the lofty ambition, all of those things were classic attention-seeking behavior from a child being denied it. When Naruto was almost killed, he had gotten the attention he sought and found out he didn't want it anymore. The Hokage had then gotten the child to promise to work hard to achieve genin status, and that promise was what had sustained Naruto for the last 2 years. And now he found himself floundering for direction again. Kurenai gave the boy a nod, acknowledging his self-introduction. It was customary, though not strictly necessary, for Jounin instructors to give their new teams a final test at this point. She already had one planned out, and giving it to them now would give her some time to plan out how she could address Sakura and Naruto's problems. Very good. Now that we've all introduced ourselves, it's time to move on to your final graduation test. Graduation test? Sakura asked, but we already graduated. You have graduated, yes, but you're not full genin until you pass a test given by your Jounin instructor. Those who fail the test will be recycled back to the academy for another year. Right now, your classmates and other teams are being told the same thing. What kind of test is it? This time it was Naruto with a question. Kurenai took note of her students' expressions. Sakura's face was an open book of apprehension tinged with a hint of fear. She was likely afraid that the test would be of an entirely practical nature. Shino appeared impassive as ever, though she noted the slight tension in the boy's shoulders indicating unease. In between them, Naruto had slipped back into a carefully guarded expression. The Jounin moved a hand to her uniform and seemingly pulled a thin folder out of nowhere. In truth, it was a minor genjutsu that she had developed to go along with her unusual uniform. Handing the folder to Naruto, seated in between his teammates, she watched as the three crowded closer to examine the folder's contents. When Naruto flipped the folder open, she saw the flash of recognition in his eye, which confirmed to Kurenai where he had gotten the idea of using his hit eye to cover his left eye. The person you're looking at is Hada Kakashi, Jounin instructor for Team 7, she explained. On the next page you'll find a basic profile on him, plus an outline of his schedule for tomorrow morning. This was accompanied by Naruto moving the photograph to one side, allowing the team to read the next page. She gave them a few moments to absorb the carefully edited profile of Kakashi she had specially written before continuing. Kakashi has agreed to help me with my test by sticking to that schedule, though he doesn't know the full details. Amongst other things, he has a reputation for being chronically late. He's holding the genin test for his own team tomorrow. He's going to tell his team to show up to the third training ground at 5 in the morning, but he's not planning on showing up until almost noon. Would a Jounin really be that late? Asked Sakura skeptically. Kurenai gave the pink-haired girl a smile. Normally, not so much. Kakashi does have a habit of being late. He has what some might consider a valid reason, though I'm not going to justify his actions to you, nor am I going to tell you what his reason is. His lateness is usually on the order of an hour or so though. Being 6 hours late is actually part of his plan for testing his genin team. Your test will take place in 2 parts. Your objective is to get Kakashi to make it to the third training ground before he intends to, without letting him or his genin know of your true intentions. Of course, this means you can't tell your friends on Kakashi's team that he's planning to show up late. you'll do your planning with each other now, and I'll be evaluating you as you do that. I'll also evaluate how well you carry your plans out tomorrow, as well as how you adapt and improvise, should your plans fail. Kurenai left unstated the fact that she did not actually expect them to succeed. She was more interested in seeing how well they planned and worked together at this point. Kurenai-sensei, is it necessary for us to conduct our planning here? 2.5 pairs of eyes turned towards one pair hidden behind dark sunglasses. The two genin candidates were surprised because Shino, to their knowledge, had never asked a question during his academy years. Kurenai on the other hand was pleased at the quiet boy's willingness to speak up amongst his teammates. No, you can choose to go anywhere you want. I'll be accompanying you though, and I expect you to have some kind of plan worked out within a reasonable amount of time. Then perhaps it would benefit us to plan this out in one of the library's study rooms. There will be fewer distractions, and we will be able to make use of the library's detailed street maps. Good idea, Shino-kun. Sakura exclaimed. Naruto, for his part, patted the taller boy on the shoulder before gathering the folder's contents and leading the way to the library. Kurenai was encouraged by their interaction. Small gestures like these were important first steps in creating a cohesive team. What if we just attack him here? Sakura asked as she pointed to a spot on the large map laid out before them and drive him towards the training ground. It's not far from this spot. 2 reasons, Naruto replied. First, Kurenai-sensei said she would be evaluating us based on our planning as well as execution. I doubt that attack him and hope he does what we want makes for a well thought out plan. Second, he's a jounin, and if they kept him in active service after losing an eye probably a very good one. There's no way 3 fresh from the academy genin could take him in a fight. If that were the case, the Sasuke Fangirl Legion would have overthrown the Hokage by revolution already and renamed this place the village hidden in Sasuke's overinflated ego. From the back of the study room Kurenai suppressed the urge to smile as Sakura fumed about the insult to Sasuke but didn't voice a disagreement. The raised collar hid Shino's mouth, but Kurenai was sure that she saw the preternaturally stoic boy's shoulders vibrate slightly. The 3 had been going at it for about an hour and each had settled into their respective roles. Naruto was the one to suggest most of the ideas, ranging from the bizarre, kidnapping Kakashi's team in the morning, to the morally dubious, peeping on the women's side of the hot springs in Kakashi Henge, then getting the angry women to chase the real Kakashi, to the somewhat workable, stealing Kakashi's little orange book. Shino was the one to critique Naruto's ideas, taking them apart in such detail that Kurenai wondered just how bad the boy would be to watch movies with. For her part, Sakura acted as a bulwark against some of Naruto's more questionable ideas. Naruto. How could you think of using orphans to threaten Kakashi? I wasn't really going to hurt them, just make Kakashi think so. I would have bribed their cooperation with Raymond. All orphans love Raymond, don't they? She made occasional suggestions on how to improve aspects of more reasonable plans Naruto came up with as well, and had also shown her organizational skills by arranging a thread on the map to indicate Kakashi's expected route, fixing the thread in place with a series of pins that she had attached time labels to. Okay, new idea, Naruto declared as he crossed out several lines on the pad before him. I think this one will work, but I'm going to need to borrow money from one of you. It's getting near the end of the month and I don't have enough left in my monthly stipend. Kurenai watched as Naruto gradually refined his plan, scribbling notes routes on the map and modifying things here and there based on a criticism from Shino or a suggestion from Sakura. She had to admit that she was intrigued, the plan was as wildly outlandish as it was surprisingly feasible. The red-eyed jounin decided then and there that she would pass this team based on what she had seen so far. But it wouldn't do to tell them just yet. No, she did not want to miss out on the fun of watching them put Kakashi through the ringer. As the sun fully crested the eastern horizon, preparing to make its long journey across the sky, the early rising citizens of Konoha were treated to an unusual sight. Hada Kakashi, famed copy ninja, elite jounin, perpetually late pervert, found himself strolling aimlessly through the streets of the village. Hours before he had even intended to wake up today. At least he thought to himself as he turned the page of the little orange pornographic book in his hands, there's a new volume of Icha Icha. 2 nights ago Kurenai had asked for his help with testing her soon-to-be genin team. His first inclination had been to decline, but then she reminded him how her genjutsu had saved him from the challenges of a very drunk and rambling Mito guy the last time the jounin had been out drinking as a group. He had reluctantly agreed, only to find a piece of paper with a list of times and locations shoved into his hand before Kurenai slipped away. She wouldn't tell him what exactly she was making her genin team do, but Kakashi had a pretty good idea anyway. Something caught his attention out of the corner of his eye and he spun around to see himself disappear from view around a corner. Complete with a little orange book and perverted giggle. Kakashi knew exactly what was going on. He had noticed the child secretly following him around, studying his posture and mannerisms. When the child had then started going around the village disguised under a Kakashi henge, the copycat ninja had covertly tailed him a few times to see what the boy intended to do with his likeness. Kakashi had come away from those observation sessions, satisfied that the child wasn't doing anything improper, and at the same time had been impressed by the young blonde's unorthodox solution to the problem of interacting with hostile villagers. Uzumaki Naruto, Kakashi mumbled to himself, this may be more interesting than I originally thought. Making for the side alley that his clone had taken earlier, Kakashi was just in time to catch a glimpse of the disguised Naruto slip around another corner. The Jounin could tell that he was being deliberately led somewhere, but with his curiosity piqued decided to follow along. 3 side alleys later, Kakashi realized that Naruto was leading him towards an outdoor food market, which was popular as a breakfast spot amongst morning laborers. Kakashi frowned, though it was hidden underneath his mask. Did Naruto not know that the food market would be crowded this time of day? How did he expect 2 identical copies of Kakashi, one following the other, to not attract attention? Shrugging, Kakashi turned the corner into the open-air market. He was just in time to watch himself walk past a dango stand, grabbing a purple-haired trench-coated woman's ass as he passed before ducking around yet another corner. The woman whirled around to look for her groper before her eyes settled murderously on the one-eyed shinobi before her, who was walking around in broad daylight with pornography in his hands. Oh crap. Kakashi. I'm going to kill you, you pervert. Anko roared as she jumped at him. Kakashi spun on his heels and bolted as fast as he could in the other direction. As he ran, it did not escape his attention that the side alley he had just come from, and the next two as well, had been suddenly blocked off by crates. So he was still being led along by Kurenai's genin team. The third side alley was clear and connected at the other end to a busy main road where Kakashi could easily lose the enraged purple-haired Takubetsu Jounin. It was more than likely a trap, but Kakashi darted down it anyway. He was somewhat amused by how things had played out so far and was curious what the next step would be. What he did not expect was to see 2 people running at him from the other side of the narrow alley, another copy of himself and another enraged-looking Anko. It was Naruto again, and probably the Haruno girl under a henge. Kakashi skidded to a stop, preparing to escape to the rooftops, when a mass of writhing darkness fell over him. The Aburum boy's bugs, his mind helpfully supplied. The unexpected bug attack startled him enough that Naruto was able to sprint the distance between them and crash into him, sending the young boy tumbling and dispelling his Kakashi henge disguise. The real Kakashi decided that the 3 genin had managed to come too close for his comfort. Grabbing the little orange book that he had dropped during the collision, Kakashi proceeded to disappear in a puff of smoke, using a quick shunshin to reappear several blocks away. Kakashi idly brushed some dust off his vest while reviewing the last few minutes in his mind. The plan, as audacious and multi-layered as it was, bore Naruto's unmistakable fingerprints. Some of the kid's more elaborate pranks were practically legend amongst the Chunin, who were routinely assigned to track him down or pick up the pieces after a prank. Given that the teams had only been formed the day before, they had nevertheless managed to coordinate their teamwork at a pretty decent level too. Kakashi only hoped that his own team would show that level of teamwork when he tested them later. But as good as Kurenai's kids' planning had been up to that point, the clash in the alley had been a mistake. It was foolish for the 3 of them to think that they could take a Jounin on in any kind of confrontation. The masked Jounin turned away, prepared to waste another few hours wandering the streets with a new volume of Icha Icha before heading to meet his own team. With an indecent giggle, he brought the book to his face, flipped to the next page, and began reading. But we mustn't, Minoru-kun, someone might see, Akira protested weakly, gasping as the taller boy's hand slipped into his shorts. What the hell? Kakashi turned the page. Akira's 2 large uniforms slipped off his shoulders and puddled at his feet, his boyishly shy face looking to one side as he bared himself. Kakashi flipped the little book over and jerked the orange dust jacket off, his visible eye widening in surprise and annoyance at what he saw. A fraction of a second later he had disappeared in another puff of shunshin smoke, with just one thought on his mind. Those little bastards, they were going to pay. Naruto ran as if his life depended on it. And, he thought between labored breaths, it just might. Every heartbeat thundered painfully in his ears. Every breath was like liquid fire in his lungs. But he ran on. His teammates had done all they could, but there was no one left now. It was up to him to finish the mission. He had left behind his customary training weights when he dressed in the morning, foregoing them to squeeze every last drop of speed he could from his small frame. Even now he felt a little unusual moving without them, as accustomed to them as he was after nearly 2 years of constant usage. The weight difference though had allowed him to make it to the edge of the village in record time. The last of Konoha's buildings passed by in a blur, and now he was in a sea of indistinct green. He was close, just a little further to the goal. He was going to make it. He was. Naruto suddenly found himself choking, feet flying forward into the air, as his forward motion was abruptly halted by an arm across his neck. The next moment he found himself flat on his back, staring unfocusedly at the sky, fighting the urge to throw up. His assailant leaned down and grabbed double handfuls of his shirt, jerking him back to his feet. In his winded state it was all he could do to throw a weak flailing hook punch at where he thought his attacker's face was. Naruto's attack was easily brushed aside, and then the attacker grabbed at the fabric of Naruto's shirt just below the elbow, while his other arm hooked under the boy's armpit. Before Naruto's mind could process what had happened, he found himself being slung violently over his attacker's shoulder, flying to land awkwardly on his back again. The feminine voice barked out, "Stop, both you. This mission is over." Naruto found himself being lifted to his feet again, this time more gently. He took a few staggering steps before collapsing against the trunk of a nearby tree, using his arms to hold his upper body vertical, while he gulped in large breaths of air. Kurenai landed in the small clearing next to Kakashi, watching her student struggle to return his breathing to normal. A minute later Shino made his way into the clearing, panting heavily from the exertion of trying to catch up with Naruto. He was followed shortly after by an embarrassed-looking Sakura, slung unceremoniously under Anko's arm like a sack of rice. Kakashi lifted the brow of his visible eye. "So you were in on it too." Anko grinned in reply while putting Sakura on her feet. "What can I say? The plan sounded interesting, and he bribed me with a month of dango." "First things first," Kakashi insisted, "my book." Naruto reached into one of the larger pockets of his pants, pulling out a little orange book and holding it up. Kakashi took his precious book and thrust the replacement at Naruto, only for the boy to jerk his thumb at Sakura without looking. Understanding the boy's meaning, Kakashi tossed the book at Sakura, who caught it and quickly shoved it in her hip pouch with a blush. "So," Kurenai began, "thoughts?" The one-eyed Jounin had already flipped his orange book open and replied without looking up from its pages, Good planning and coordination, I'd say. Shorty needs to learn how to pick his shots more carefully though." "Anko?" asked Kurenai. "Just make sure you give them enough free time for the kid to get me my dango." Kurenai took a few seconds to mentally review the events of the morning. She had decided to pass the team while watching them plan yesterday, and seeing their execution today had only confirmed her decision. She was looking forward to working with this group. "I didn't expect you three to succeed with the test, but you were a lot closer than I thought you would be. I'm happy to announce that Team 8 officially passes. We'll start team training and missions tomorrow." Kurenai watched with a smile as Sakura threw her arms into the air and cheered. Next to her, Naruto pulled himself to his feet with a small smile on his face. Even Shino brought a hand to his face to adjust his sunglasses. "If you three have no plans for this afternoon," Kurenai continued, "I'm inviting you to my place for lunch to celebrate. We can also go over how you guys did with the test." "Great." Anko cheered, grabbing Naruto by the back of his collar and pulling him out of the clearing before he could resist. "We'll be there in a bit with dango and booze." On their first day as an official team, Kurenai assembled them at the crack of dawn to evaluate their skills and abilities, and had begun by putting them through a 3-hour-long workout that could have matched Mido guys in intensity if not in duration. As she expected, Sakura fell behind quickly, while Shino kept up past the halfway mark. Naruto was able to complete the entire workout, though he was barely standing afterwards. Team 8 was allowed time to recover as she gave them a lecture on the different classes of missions and the exact duties they would be expected to perform as new genin. No matter how potentially well-trained, new academy graduates were still preteens. Kurenai had heard horror stories from more experienced Jounin instructors about genin who, discovering the drudgery that was D-rank missions, had thrown temper tantrums at the mission hall or in front of the Hokage. She had no intention of allowing that to happen with her team. That was followed by an hour of shuriken and kunai testing. Unlike academy practice, however, Kurenai had her students throwing from a variety of situations. Strafing on the run, retreating, throwing from a quick turn, crouched in a tree, mid-jump, and others. As his academy evaluation suggested he would, Shino performed solidly if unspectacularly in all situations. Because of this, Kurenai set him to practicing a number of more advanced throwing techniques that weren't covered by academy lessons, such as throwing from the draw in one motion and concealing the throwing motion to hide the projectile's flight path before it left the thrower's hand. Sakura's was adequate from a stationary posture, putting the majority of her projectiles into the target painted on the large tree stump. While on the move though, her aim deteriorated badly and she could only hit the stump itself with any consistency. Kurenai did what she could to correct the girl's throwing motion, as well as giving her additional tips, but ultimately concluded that what Sakura needed was simply a lot more practice. It didn't surprise her that Naruto was wildly off the mark when throwing on the move, managing to hit the stump only once all session. It did surprise her, however, when he missed the stump far more often than not from stationary throwing postures. In fact, he never even managed to touch the target from any throwing posture. "Naruto, how did you manage to pass the academy thrown weapons test anyway?" she inquired. Well, I watched the testing for last year's graduates, so I knew which stumps the instructors would use and how far away I needed to be. I snuck into the academy practice grounds at night so I could practice like that, and I just kept at it until I guess I memorized exactly how my body needed to feel to put my throw on target at each distance. Naruto looked away, scratching the back of his head. It was clear that he felt a little uncomfortable about having cheated in order to pass. Kurenai simply quirked a brow. You mean you practiced at each testing distance until you had the exact movement pattern needed to hit at each testing distance, committed to muscle memory? Yeah, I guess, Naruto replied sheepishly. Kurenai briefly contemplated having him do the same thing, for every angle, from every position, at intervals of a few steps at a time, before discarding that idea as both impractically extensive and simply unnecessary. She wondered though, whether he would actually do it if she asked him to, and presented him with a convincing argument for why his throwing skills needed to be top-notch. You don't have to be embarrassed about how you passed. If anything, you deserve credit for finding a solution to your unique situation and then having the determination to work at it until you succeed. Thanks, I guess. Naruto gave her a small smile at the unaccustomed acknowledgement. Just remember, Kurenai said, every ninja has unique strengths and weaknesses. You know your weaknesses and have found ways to overcome some of them. If you're not good at thrown weapons, you just need to find some way of beating ranged specialists by forcing them to fight where you're strongest. After the thrown weapons session, Kurenai then had each of her students demonstrate all of their ninjutsu abilities, one by one. There were several purposes to this exercise. The obvious one was so she could evaluate their skill with ninjutsu, but it was also so the genin would be familiar with each other's abilities. Although Sakura only knew the academy basic ninjutsu and had a smaller than average chakra reserve, Kurenai was pleased to note that her academy evaluations were correct about her precise chakra control. Shino followed next with his own demonstration of the academy basics. He then created a bunshin out of his Kakechu and explained the other things he could do with his bugs, such as passing messages with bugs that could tap their hindquarters and planting female bugs with special glands on targets so they could be tracked by scent later. It was at this point that Sakura had insisted quite firmly that he never put any of his bugs on her on pain of getting beaten by an irate Kunoichi. When it was Naruto's turn, he dutifully rose and ran through the academy basics, finishing with the sickly-looking bunshin that had almost gotten him failed during the ninjutsu portion of the graduation exam. Naruto, create a bunshin again, but complete the hand seals more quickly this time, Kurenai ordered. Naruto nodded and complied with her order, completing the seals more quickly and producing another poorly made bunshin. Again. He tried again, this time racing through the hand seals. As he finished, Kurenai discreetly made her own hand seal and hit him with a minor genjutsu, meant to disrupt his concentration with a quick flash of brightness. It wasn't a very useful genjutsu and would have been automatically tuned out by more experienced shinobi with better chakra control. But with Naruto it was enough. Kurenai watched as Naruto rubbed the blurriness out of his eye, only to be startled by the sight of a perfectly made bunshin staring back at him. Interesting, Kurenai murmured thoughtfully. Kurenai-sensei, what was that flash of light? Did you do something so I could make a bunshin? Naruto asked. Naruto, did you ever wonder why you were able to trick Mizuki with your bunshin when you've never been able to make a proper one during academy testing? Not really, I just thought that he'd be too disoriented by the exploding tags to notice how crappy they looked. No, Anko watched your fight and told me the bunshin were virtually perfect copies. Seeing the confusion in Naruto's expression, Kurenai explained. As I thought, you were overloading your bunshin with chakra. During the fight you produced bunshin from opposite sides of Mizuki within seconds before attacking from a third, meaning you didn't have time to stand and gather chakra like you do in a classroom test. With the last attempt I hit you with a minor genjutsu to distract you, causing you to lose some of your built-up chakra as you created the bunshin. So my problem the whole time was too much chakra? Naruto asked dubiously, before flicking through the hand seals and creating another bunshin with none of his usual tension and concentration. Again, it came out perfectly. You have an exceptionally large chakra reserve, easily the largest of any genin I've ever seen. I'm surprised your academy instructors didn't bring it up, Kurenai said. Actually, she wasn't, but now wasn't the time to deal with that topic. Naruto's eye widened slightly, while Sakura looked at her teammate skeptically, and one of Shino's eyebrows rose. In time that's going to be a major advantage, but it's common for ninja with larger than normal capacities to have problems with chakra control, Kurenai continued. For now we need to work on your control, so you're not overloading every jutsu you try. Some of them just get bigger and better with more chakra, but most fizzle out or have even worse consequences for the user. Afterwards she allowed her team a late lunch break, with Naruto producing a pair of cup ramen, while the rest of the team brought out their respective bento. Lunch passed mostly in silence, with the genin having been sufficiently tired out from the morning's exertions that they put their entire focus into eating. Once everyone had finished, Kurenai then moved to the final topic she wanted to cover for the day, Taijutsu. Standing under the shade of a tree and teammates' designated training ground, Shino watched as Naruto once again squared off with his roughly carved wooden katana against their sensei. Naruto settled into a right side forward stance with left heel slightly off the ground, both hands holding the sword at abdomen level with the blade diagonally upwards. The sword isn't a part of the standard Konoha Academy curriculum, but Shino recognized this as the most basic and versatile Kenjutsu stance from supplementary reading assignments. Kurenai adopted a left leg forward crouched stance, shoulders squared with most of her weight on her front leg, both hands in a tight guard in front of her face and throat. It was a strongly defensive posture, but difficult to attack out of. For a few seconds the two watched each other in silence, Naruto breathing slightly fast from their previous exchanges. It was Sakura, after the celebratory lunch at Kurenai's place the day before, who had finally asked Naruto about his fight with Mizuki. From the Jounin's reaction it was evident that Kurenai already knew, and while Shino was curious, he had been content to wait until the answer revealed itself in some way. Naruto had then explained his reasoning behind taking up Kenjutsu and how he only practiced Taijutsu to the extent that he felt he needed to graduate from the academy. Naruto made the first move, stepping then lunging forward into a thrust at Kurenai's chest. The Jounin instructor parried the wooden blade to one side and threw a front kick at Naruto's midsection, which was blocked when the blonde dropped his weight on his back leg and brought the sword's hilt down to meet the kick. He then flicked the tip of the sword at Kurenai's left temple in a feint before stepping to her right, twisting his hips hard while flipping his hands and sending the blade crashing down diagonally hard at the right side of his sensei's neck. Kurenai read his intention and decided to forego a safer attack in favor of the opportunity to test how he dealt with opponents invading his personal space. She put up a hand to guard against the feint before taking advantage of her flexibility to lean back deeply, allowing the blade to pass over her face during the true attack. As she recovered her posture she dashed forward at Naruto, left palm heel flying at his face. Naruto responded by twisting his body to the left, twisting his head out of the path of the palm heel, while pulling the blade along at abdomen level with his body motion. It was a good response, Kurenai thought approvingly, difficult to counter at such close ranges. The only drawbacks were the head twist putting her out of his range of vision and the fact that a wooden blade instead of steel meant a nasty bruise if it landed rather than a likely disembowelment. Kurenai dropped her upper body down and forward as if to roll, letting the blade slice harmlessly over her before continuing the motion into a cartwheel. At the movement's apex she twisted her hips, tapping the back of Naruto's head with her foot. Deciding to press him more she lunged after his retreating form as soon as she was on her feet again, springing into the air as she approached. As she expected, Naruto read his stance and brought the katana up to his head to protect against the jumping kick he thought was coming. Kurenai caught a glimpse of the surprise on his face as she flew clear over him in a flip, landing in a crouch with her back to his several steps away. As soon as she touched down, Kurenai sprung off her feet again, this time into a backflip at Naruto. Using the momentum of the movement, she sent the instep of her right foot crashing down on him from directly overhead while she was in an upside-down position in the middle of the backflip. Naruto just barely managed to twist to his right and bring his forearm up to block the attack, not having enough time to turn fully and bring his katana into play. Planting her right fingertips on the ground while still upside down, Kurenai shifted her weight to one side and spun like a tilted top, chambering her right leg while whipping her left leg behind her to attack Naruto from his left. He caught a hint of her intention and tried to shift his body out of the way, but the heel of Kurenai's left leg managed to clip him painfully in the back of the ribs on his left side. A second later she struck with her chambered right leg in a thrust kick, connecting with the fleshy part of Naruto's right upper arm. Kurenai pushed against his arm, sending him staggering away from her, while she used the motion to flip out of her tilted upside-down posture to land upright in a crouch facing Naruto. "Enough," Kurenai said with a raised hand. "Shino, Sakura, you two are up next." The bug user and the pink-haired Kunoichi made their way to the center of the clearing, while Kurenai and Naruto took their place in the shade. Sakura adopted the academy standard Taijutsu ready position, while Shino used a variant with a deeper posture and his front hand placed more aggressively to take advantage of his height and weight advantage. Sakura charged first, meeting a stationary Shino and throwing a series of punches and kicks that Kurenai mentally identified as Academy Taijutsu training combo number 16. Shino blocked and parried his way through the assault with little effort, countering during a break in the combo's rhythm with a stepping palm strike to the abdomen that sent the girl staggering backwards. After a few moments' recovery, Sakura attacked with another Academy standard combo to the same lack of success before the bug user latched onto her outstretched fist and pulled it backwards. Sakura stumbled before recovering her balance, just in time for Shino to kick out her front leg across her body while pulling her arm in the opposite direction, dropping her straight down to the ground in a boneless heap. Kurenai frowned slightly as Shino took a few steps back to give Sakura space to return to her feet. After 2 exchanges, Sakura was already beginning to breathe heavily, while Shino was absolutely still in his stance, showing no visible signs of exertion. In addition to basic shinobi skills, academy students were also required to learn everything civilian children of their age did. Because of that, academy classes tended to focus their limited time on teaching new skills and knowledge, leaving physical training to the students on their own initiative. Clan children invariably had supplementary training with family members. But it seemed that Sakura, coming from a civilian home, lacked the background and motivation to have made a serious effort outside of academy classes. Kurenai added that to her mental list of things she would have to work with the pink-haired girl on. Beside her, Naruto had flipped out a small wood carving knife from his pocket, was now working on the half-finished sword in his hand, alternation his attention from the sword to the match before him. While the 2 combatants in the center of the clearing circled each other, Kurenai sent the boy a questioning glance. The one I used against Mizuki got badly cracked, and I've learned it's easier to just make my own replacements instead of scrounging every time I break one in practice. Naruto replied simply, and then added after a moment's pause, it's a good skill to have when you want to repair your own furniture too. But that looks more like a samurai-style katana, doesn't it? Naruto shrugged, shaving another sliver of wood off the katana. My first sword was a wooden Anbu-style ninja too. I've been gradually adapting the sword design to fit my own needs with each new version. Making the sword longer helps with more reach, and the curved blade is better for slashing attacks. Kurenai nodded, turning her attention back to the fight. This time Shino took the initiative, throwing a series of quick probing attacks designed to keep Sakura on the defensive before winding up a leaping spinning back crescent kick that crashed through Sakura's guard. Even though Shino had deliberately used only the minimum amount of strength necessary on the attack, it still sent Sakura reeling across the clearing. Enough, you can stop now, Kurenai called out, and the 2 combatants rejoined the rest of their team in the shade. Shino accepted the bottled water Naruto proffered with a nod of acknowledgement, while their Jounin instructor placed her hands on Sakura's face where Shino had struck. Kurenai wasn't a medic nin by any stretch of the imagination, but she had picked up enough to be able to deal with bruises and other minor injuries. After seeing all of you sparring, I now have a good idea of where we are and how I want each of you to progress. Sakura, you have a good intellectual understanding of the taijutsu taught at the academy, but you haven't internalized it enough to make yourself an effective fighter. The biggest problem though is the fact that you lack stamina, as well as the strength and flexibility to use a lot of the techniques and strategies effectively. Sakura accepted her instructor's words without comment. While she didn't like any aspect of her ninja skills belittled, she acknowledged that her physical conditioning was sorely lacking compared to the rest of her team. So, Kurenai continued, I'm going to come by your place later tonight with a scroll of exercises for you to do on your own time, and I expect you to follow the schedule to the best of your ability. Once we bring you up to a decent point physically, we'll work on improving your sparring skills. Kurenai then turned to the bug user. Shino, I noticed you made adjustments to the basic academy style to take advantage of your height and weight. But you rely too much on blocking and not enough on movement, so in sparring, I want you to focus on dodging where you would normally block and sidestepping where you'd move forwards or backwards. Evasion and lateral movement give you more options in a fight. Against certain fighters like the Hyuga with their Jaiuken, dodging is a much better option than blocking. She then turned to her last student. Naruto, with Kinjutsu your instincts are sharp and you have good efficiency of movement. You tend to get sloppy when an exchange gets too long though, probably because you haven't had a partner to practice against until now. You need more experience sparring to polish what you already know, but I also want you to keep up with taijutsu in your own practice time, so you won't be completely overwhelmed if you lose your sword in a fight. Kurenai allowed her students a few moments to absorb what she'd said before clapping her hands together to attract their attention. Now, I think Team 8 is ready for its first official mission. Kurenai's team had been amongst the last to arrive at the mission hall that day, as she had spent so much time evaluating her team's skills. Only 2 D-rank missions were left at the time, processing herbs and delivering packages for an herbalist who lived at the edge of town, or catching the daimyo's wife's cat Tora. Kurenai chose the former without hesitation. Her timing proved fortuitous, as soon as Team 10 made their way through the doors of the mission hall not a second later. Unlike her team, disheveled and dirty from exercise and sparring, his genin looked like they had just spent the day lying around talking and playing shogi. If Asuma deals with a Nara kid like he dealt with the kid's father, Kurenai thought, they probably had. Kurenai gathered her genin and led them out the door quickly, giving the bearded Jounin an evil smirk as she passed. The two had graduated in the same academy class, and Kurenai remembered quite well how much Asuma hated the Tora retrieval mission as a genin. The original Tora had died some years back, but if the reaction of last year's Jounin instructors were any indication, the daughter was just as bad as the mother. Kurenai led her team to the edge of town where herbalist Ninamai lived, stopping by a public fountain so they could quickly wash up from the day's exertions. Once there they were met by an old woman with ash-gray hair and a bun, apron tied around her waist and smelling strongly of medicine. Herbalist Ninamai looked the team over, giving Naruto a startled second glance, then stepped aside to let them in her house without comment. Within a few minutes she had explained how to sort and package the various herbal mixes before handing Kurenai a list of matched mixes and delivery locations and leaving for the forest with basket in hand to collect herbs for the next few days' orders. Seeing the opportunity to talk to each genin on her team privately, Kurenai suggested that two of them handle deliveries while the third stayed with her. She sent Naruto and Sakura out first on separate delivery routes, leaving Shino alone with her. Of her three students, Shino was the most balanced in terms of abilities. What he needed was simply more interaction with the others to develop a bond of camaraderie, so she decided to probe his opinion of his teammates. "So Shino," Kurenai began casually as she wrapped another bundle of herbs, "what do you think of your team so far?" The bug user's hands paused as he gathered his thoughts. Kurenai waited patiently. The Abiram were known for speaking very deliberately, and prodding Shino before he was ready with a response would not serve a useful purpose. "At first, I was concerned with our combat capabilities as a team. Team 10 has Chaoji and the dynamic of their clan abilities, while Team 7 has two of the top-ranked fighters from our class, plus a Jyuken user. By academy rankings I'm the best at Taijutsu in the team, and though I have confidence in my abilities, I'm not a close combat specialist." Kurenai nodded, waiting for Shino to continue. The Abiram were also quite analytical, and she had expected Shino to note the team's weakness in combat, at least according to academy records. "After watching Naruto spar and facing off against him myself, I have come to the conclusion that my concerns were unfounded. With Kenjutsu he might be near Uchiha Sasuke or Inyazuka Kiba's level of fighting ability. With Naruto as our close combat specialist and some more training, I feel the Team 8 has enough capability to overcome any genin level combat situations. How do you feel about Sakura then?" The only sign of Shino's discomfort with the question was a quick poke of his finger to adjust his sunglasses. "Sakura is very intelligent and has exceptional chakra control, but is a poor fighter. At present she is a negligible part of the team's combat capabilities, though that may change with more training. I suspect that she was put on this team so that she could specialize in Genjutsu to take advantage of her chakra control." That was an option Kurenai had considered as well. Like most Genjutsu users, she was not nearly as good at close combat as the specialists like Asuma or Midougai. Genjutsu specialists typically stayed at range, striking under cover of a Genjutsu and retreating as soon as the advantage of surprise was lost. Fighting this way, Sakura would be able to sidestep some of her problems. But in order to be effective the pink-haired girl would need to improve her thrown weapon skills considerably, as Genjutsu specialists needed to take advantage of any opening accurately and instantaneously. The two let the rest of the time pass in silence until Naruto and Sakura returned from their delivery runs. This time Kurenai had Sakura stay behind to give the girl a break, while the boys would each take two back-to-back delivery shifts. Kurenai chose her angle of approach as she ushered the boys out with their packages and routes. She had already pointed out Sakura's shortcomings in Taijutsu and physical conditioning, so now it was time to look at the girl's motivation. "Sakura, where do you see yourself going as a kunoichi, skill-wise?" "Sensei?" the girl asked uncertainly. "Do you see yourself, for example, specializing in any particular field?" "Well, I think I might be interested in learning medical ninjutsu." That answer surprised Kurenai. Medic nins needed greater chakra control than even Genjutsu specialists. Even the most talented medic nins did not develop that level of control until mid-chunin level, and most jounin of other specializations never managed it at all. Because of that academy lessons only focused on basic first aid practices such as bandaging and splinting, and never touched on even the basic theories of medical ninjutsu. "That's an interesting choice, Sakura. To be honest I've never seen a fresh genin with a level of chakra control like yours. Even most jounin don't have quite the level of control required to be a medic nins, but with enough practice, I could easily see you getting there in the near future." The pink-haired girl beamed at the compliment. Kurenai decided then that she would make chakra control exercises a priority during team training, starting with tree walking tomorrow. It would help Sakura get to medic nin level faster, but Naruto also sorely needed more control as well. Kurenai spent the rest of their time together asking more innocuous questions. She gently probed about Sakura's home life and childhood, masking it with idle girl chatter that Kurenai knew from her own experience would set most girls at Sakura's age at ease. She could infer a great deal about some of the other rookie genin based on shared clan characteristics, and she had learned quite a bit about Naruto's past from the file the Hokage had given her. But with Sakura coming from a civilian background, Kurenai didn't know much about the girl beyond her academic records and interactions with teammates over the past 2 days. Once the boys returned, Kurenai sent Shino and Sakura out with the last load of deliveries for the day, while she set Naruto to preparing the rest of herbalist Ninami's collected herbs for tomorrow's deliveries. The months he spent hospitalized or in detention had effectively taken away an entire year from him at an age where most kids started forming serious bonds of friendship with their peers, and that was on top of the social isolation he suffered as the Kyuubi's container. The blonde had all the determination in the world, she had no doubt of that. But that determination had lost its focus after he had fulfilled his promise to the Hokage. She still remembered how he had floundered for a goal during his self-introduction. What Naruto needed now was a defined role to play within the team, something only he could do. Something he could focus on again. "Naruto, what do you see your role in the team as?" "What do you mean, sensei?" "I'm supposed to complete missions with my team, aren't I?" "Yes, but that's not what I'm asking. The reason that genin are put on three-person teams is so their skills can complement each other. For example, Sakura is very intelligent and has the potential to be very good at Jinjutsu or medical ninjutsu, but she's not a good close combat fighter. Shino is capable at Taijutsu, but his clan's ability with Kakechu makes him more suited for a scouting and support role. So, Naruto replied after a moment's thought, I would be the close combat specialist and teammate, right? Yes, with Kinjutsu you're already better than Shino in combat, and I expect you to improve with more practice. As a Jinjutsu specialist, when we get into combat situations as a team I'm most effective fighting from range. That means you're the one who's going to be engaging enemies up close. Every attack that you can draw onto yourself is one that isn't aimed at your teammates. If an enemy manages to get past you in close combat, Shino or Sakura would stand less of a chance than you. I'm not asking you to sacrifice yourself for your team. What I am saying though is that, in a very real way, your teammates' lives will depend on your ability to protect them. In the future I may be asking more of you in terms of training than I might your teammates, more than you might think is fair. But in order for this team to have the best chance of surviving dangerous missions, you need to be as prepared as you can possibly be. Do you understand what I'm saying? Naruto nodded somberly. He had worked at a frenetic pace to improve his own skills so he could fulfill his promise to graduate from the academy, but he had not until now considered what role he would play in a team. Kurenai smiled at him and decided to change the flow of the conversation to lift his mood. That's not the only role you can play in this team though. Think back to our first day as a team when you were planning for my test. What did you do then? Planning for the test. I guess I suggested the basic idea for the plan we eventually used. You actually suggested more than a dozen different plans. Shino and Sakura did their part in pointing out flaws or refining ideas, but the original ideas mostly came from you. That kind of quick adaptability and improvisation is very valuable for a shinobi, even if some of your ideas were. Kurenai trailed off. She couldn't think of a word that meant equal parts of inspired, bizarre, and unethical, so she settled for an indistinct hand gesture. Well, I just came at the problem like I would a prank. It's not like that kind of thing would help in a fight. Naruto, you're a ninja now, Kurenai said with some emphasis. The academy concentrates on fighting skills because it's the easiest to teach at your age and the most immediately useful. But being a ninja isn't about fighting all the time, that's what thugs do. The most skilled ninja are the ones who manage to get in, complete their mission, and get out without anyone else even noticing. Their ability to come up with ideas makes it possible to approach your mission target in ways that its defenders may not even have thought to protect against. If you can do that, it doesn't matter how strong their defenses are because you've just completely bypassed them. Don't sell yourself short when it comes to fighting either, because that kind of thinking did help you in fighting Mizuki. When it's just Taijutsu or Kinjutsu, fights are fast and instinctive. But when you add in ninjutsu and jinjutsu, combat becomes a lot more mental and tactical, like a game of shogi. There have been many instances of weaker fighters winning because they used unexpected strategies. Naruto nodded slowly, lost in thought as his hands worked on herbs automatically. Kurenai allowed the conversation to lapse, working on her own stack of herbs in silence for a few minutes before she noticed Naruto's features shift slightly. Sensei, I might have an idea, Naruto said, some uncertainty audible in his tone. Yes. You know when I stole that scroll? I told Jiji all about what Mizuki wanted ahead of time, and he told me to go ahead with what the traitor said, but he replaced the scroll with another before I stole it. Kurenai simply nodded. She was used to Naruto's casual way of addressing Konoha's most important and powerful ninja by now, and it was evident the Hokage had a certain fondness for the boy as well. Well, I've got some ideas from that scroll, and, as she listened to Naruto lay out his thoughts, she allowed herself a small smile at the boy's enthusiasm and creativity. She knew just who to bring in to help Naruto. It was simply a matter of getting her to agree. Why me? Why not Hayate or his girlfriend? I asked. He says his style was passed down in his family and he's not comfortable teaching it to someone he doesn't know. Yuzuki-san's busy with an assignment, she told me she wouldn't be in Konoha regularly until after the start of the Chunin exams. So I ask again, why me? It's not like I run around Konoha with one strapped to my back. You're the most logical choice. Out of all the adult shinobi population in Konoha, he only has a positive relationship with the two of us in the third. We can't just go and ask Hokage-sama to personally train him, and between the two of us you're the better candidate. Tearing the last dango off its skewer with her teeth, Anko casually flicked her wrist and impaled the now bare stick into a nearby tree. Kurenai had never made secret or disapproval of Anko's dietary preferences, so when the red-eyed Jounin had invited her to a dango lunch the first weekend after academy graduation, Anko had a pretty good idea this wasn't just a social visit. When Kurenai had offered to pay, Anko knew that she was going to be asked to do something she most likely wouldn't want to do. She didn't expect Kurenai's request to be Kenjutsu training for Naruto. Having been through Anbu training she was competent with a long blade, though not nearly to the level of a specialized swordsman like Heijaku. But her twisted relationship with her own mentor, in her younger days, hardly made her an ideal candidate as any sort of teacher for an impressionable young genin. Add in the fact that she was quite openly against the idea of being a teacher, having turned down a number of requests from the Hokage to take up genin teams over the last few years. Across the table from her Kurenai picked up a stick of dango and nibbled at it. Unlike Anko and her avowed loyalty to her namesake syrup-covered dango, Kurenai had chosen the green tea-flavored type. Anko crinkled her nose in distaste at her lunch partner's choice. Despite counting tea ceremony as one of her hobbies, Anko had a strange aversion to any green tea-flavored foods. For Kurenai though, who was Anko's opposite in nearly every way including an intense dislike of dango, green tea flavor was one of the only types she would willingly eat. Anko picked up another stick of dango, pointing it at Kurenai and twirling the stick with her fingers to prevent the syrup from dripping. So I'm the most logical choice, from your point of view. But what makes you think I'll actually agree? You like Naruto, I can tell. You see a younger version of yourself in him, Kurenai pointed out. Anko snorted. Not enough to spend my time teaching the kid when I could be taking missions or getting drunk or, doing anything else fun. Looking around quickly to make sure no one was watching, Kurenai turned to Anko and turned on the full power of her puppy eyes look, complete with pouting mouth. In the process of pulling another dango off the stick, Anko choked it down with a cough before glaring at her companion with an audible growl in her throat. Anyone who knew the two would have found the sight bizarre. Many who acquainted with Anko on a casual basis thought her to be borderline sociopathic and possibly insane. In fact, it was an image she had taken some effort to cultivate. She was known to growl at people, but generally as a prelude to trying to separate their more important internal organs from their bodies. Kurenai on the other hand was widely seen as reserved, even somewhat cold. No one could possibly imagine her giving anyone a puppy dog eyes look under any situation. For the two of them however, it was just part of the pattern of odd back and forth interaction they had established as part of their friendship. Assuming I accept, Anko finally said with a sigh, and I'm not saying I do, what am I working with? You saw him in the Mizuki fight, and you told me you watched him taking practice swings in Anbu lockup. You're his Jounin instructor now, you must have sparred him a few times. So tell me, what's your evaluation? He has good instincts with a sword, like you said, Kurenai replied. As far as I know the Mizuki fight was the first time he's had an opponent, sparring or not, and he's already the best fighter on my team. What he needs is someone who knows Kenjutsu to make minor corrections and enhancements to his basic techniques and postures, and most of all more experience sparring. You know I don't do light sparring. If I do this he's going to get roughed up bad. Kurenai knew from first-hand experience that was true. Practice sparring with a trench-coated Takebetsu Jounin wasn't much different from full-scale war. To be honest, it's what he needs. What the team needs as a whole in fact. The other two Genin teams this year have combat specialist Jounin team leaders, and the other two Genin on my team aren't suited for close combat. He understands that I'm going to make demands on him above and beyond the norm, and he has the willpower to see things through once he's made up his mind. Just don't hurt him so badly that he can't walk out of the hospital afterwards, okay? Anko didn't respond, choosing pulling another dango off the stick instead. She really did like Naruto. As Kurenai had said, of Konoha's adult population, the only ones who knew the kid in any meaningful way were the two of them and the Hokage himself. She could see in him the same sense of longing that she herself had in her younger days. She could also see just how desperately he worked in order to prove himself to the Hokage. As someone with a fierce loyalty to the Hokage herself, due to his unwavering support of her and shielding her from the repercussions of her former master's actions, that was a quality that Anko could respect. Kurenai saw the indecision in her friend's eyes and played her trump card. If it helps, I can sweeten the pot. If you agree to this, I'll let you help Naruto on another project that he's working on. Anko looked at the Genjutsu mistress as if she'd grown a second head. You're trying to bribe me to help the kid, Anko said carefully, waving her now bare dango stick at the other woman in a swirling pattern, as if to emphasize her point, with an offer of letting me help the kid with something else. Kurenai replied by motioning for Anko to lean closer with her fingers, then moved closer herself and began whispering in Anko's ear. As she listened, Anko's expression changed from a quizzical frown to a smile. By the time Kurenai had finished, a broad grin was plastered on Anko's face, and the indistinct sound that had begun deep in her throat erupted into a series of mad cackles. The outburst attracted the attention of the dango shop's other patrons, and several faces turned to stare at the two female jounin. Kurenai saw expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension, the latter no doubt wondering whether the trench-coated Takebetsu jounin had finally snapped. Once Anko finally regained control of herself, she wiped the spittle from her mouth with one hand while flicking the dango stick at the nearby tree with her other. Fine. I'll start teaching the kid on weekends when you don't have team practice. Tell him to find me tomorrow around noon. Kurenai simply smiled in reply. For all her odd tendencies and frightening reputation, Anko was unusually easy to read and manipulate for someone of her rank and experience as a shinobi. That was, provided that you were one of the few people who had managed to penetrate her harsh exterior shell to get to know her well. And Kurenai knew Anko very well. Sarutobi Hiruzen leaned back in his plush leather reclining chair, taking a long puff from his pipe. He sighed as he set aside yet another pile of completed paperwork. It had been nearly 3 weeks since the latest batch of academy students graduated, and he was expecting the outburst any day now. Each year some rookie genin or other always snapped, refusing to do another tour retrieval or potato digging mission. Once one team had gotten a C-rank mission, the others would then demand the same. It was a rite of passage really. There was a prepared speech that was fed to the genin, something or other about D-rank missions building teamwork. In truth, D-rank missions were just grunt work around the village that needed to be done. They were a way for industrious genin to make a bit of spending money and a way for jounin instructors to examine their team's social interaction in different settings. But for genin trying to improve their shinobi skills, the only one with any real training value was the cat retrieval mission that always seemed to pop up every other day or so. Sarutobi thought back to his own instructor days when his genin team had been the first to get a C-rank mission in their graduating class. Surprisingly, it had been Tsunade who had thrown the tantrum. It was after yet another cat retrieval mission, with a hot-headed blonde dragging in a vicious little beast named Kasha by the scruff of its neck. On reflection, he supposed that it really wasn't that surprising. Orochimaru was always the quiet type, and Jiraiya had been too busy ogling the fire daimyo's mistress's ample breasts to complain that day. That one had always been a pervert, even as a preteen. Sarutobi just hadn't noticed it at the time. The rattling of his office's glass windows, accompanied by a low roaring noise, shook Sarutobi out of his reverie. Aged muscles groaned at the unaccustomed demands of speed as he jolted out of his chair, disappearing from his office and reappearing at the top of the Hokage Tower in a shunshin. His eyes scanned around anxiously, looking for any sign of hostile shinobi attacking, until they settled on a plume of smoke rising from deep within the forest to the east. If he remembered right, that was where one of the most isolated training grounds was situated. In fact, it was so far out of the way that only one jounin had reserved it in the last few years. Sarutobi's mind made the connection instantly, and he groaned. If this was what he thought it was, he would soon be faced with a lot more paperwork. He made his way back to the Hokage office, in a slow walk this time, dispatching a pair of chunin to investigate the explosion on the way. It wasn't long after he had settled back in his office and refilled his pipe that the two chunin he had dispatched returned escorting confirmation of his worst fears in the form of Mitarashi Anko, followed closely by Uzumaki Naruto. Both grinning like lunatics. This isn't going to be good, he thought to himself. This isn't going to be good, he said aloud. Hokage-sama, Anko greeted the Hokage respectfully, without losing her grin. It only made her seem more maniacal. Sarutobi put his pipe down and rubbed at his temples. So, what happened? Well Jiji, Naruto started, you know that scroll. Sarutobi gave a slight nod without looking up, prompting Naruto to continue. He knew exactly which scroll Naruto was referring to and was beginning to regret letting the boy keep it after that night. I wanted to see how big I could make one. Sarutobi really didn't want to know. Whatever the answer was, it would only bring more paperwork. But he was the Hokage, and he had a duty to Konoha. So he mentally squared his shoulders, looked up at Naruto, and asked a question. So how big was it? Well, you know how big my bedroom is. The Hokage nodded uncertainly. That big. It took a minute for Sarutobi to understand what Naruto had actually said. An exploding tag's explosive force came from nothing more than the creator's chakra, imbued into the ink used in the creation process. In order to use that stored chakra, the ink had to then be painted in specific patterns, creating a stable seal matrix, which also needed to be sustained with imbued chakra during the painting process. The balance this created was what allowed tags to be used by even academy students with their limited chakra reserves, as any chakra applied to the tag would destabilize the trigger seal, initiating the burn that would result in the eventual disintegration of the seal matrix containing the explosive chakra. Explosive tags were very costly to make in terms of chakra, and the typical genin who tried to make one would most likely end up in the hospital for chakra exhaustion. They had been popular early in shinobi history, but had gradually fallen by the wayside as new jutsu were created that could replace their utility without preparation beforehand and requiring much less chakra for the same level of damage caused. They were still useful in specific situations against ninja of lesser experience and were one of the ways retired or disabled jounin could earn money. Those jounin stuck to creating tags using established formulas though. By the time a ninja built up enough of a chakra reserve to create tags, they invariably had also acquired enough experience to know that tags weren't useful against skilled opponents. Thus there was little point experimenting beyond the basic designs. And then there was Naruto, with his enormous chakra supply, wild inventiveness, and a seemingly complete lack of caution. You, Sarutobi said slowly, created an explosive tag the size of your bedroom, took it to training ground 39, and set it off. I actually painted the seal right on the ground. It took me a week just to prepare the ink and 2 days to create the seals. It was a good thing there wasn't any rain last night. I made 8 cascading chains of explosive nodes, all linked to one central trigger node, and altered the fuses so that they would all go off at the same time once the last node of each chain triggered. Naruto's smile seemed to get impossibly wide as he finished. He evidently took a great deal of pride in what he had just done. The Hokage turned next to Anko, who was still grinning madly. "And what was your role in this?" "I just supervised. I made sure the kid didn't blow himself up and that there was no one else in the training area. Naruto did all the work." "How much damage was there?" The smoke plume was visible from the top of the Hokage tower. "All of it, Hokage-sama." "All of what?" "The entire training ground. It's one big crater now. The kid basically poured 9 days worth of his chakra into making this thing." Sarutobi's eyebrow twitched. 39 was one of the smallest training grounds, but it was still a decent-sized plot of land. He could see the paperwork now. Resurfacing, landscaping, replanting. Everything would need to be documented and signed in triplicate. There was also the matter of what to do about the perpetrators. Technically they hadn't done anything wrong, so he couldn't punish them. But it simply didn't seem appropriate to praise them for blowing up an entire training ground. After some thought, Sarutobi settled for the most neutral response he could think of. "Naruto, now that you've conducted your experiment I hope there won't be a need for any repeats. Training grounds are expensive to rebuild." "Of course not, Jiji. Like I said, I just wanted to test how big I could make one. Besides, even I have enough common sense to know that an explosive tag that takes 9 days to make and can't be moved isn't really useful." Sarutobi could only smile at that. "Very well, Naruto. If there's nothing else I suppose you two can leave." Anko gave the Hokage a respectful bow, pushing Naruto's head down into a rough bow at the same time before turning and leading him out. The 2 Chunin who had escorted them and left with them as well. Watching the pair leave his office with a bounce in their steps, the Hokage reflected back to the events of that day. After informing Anko and Ibiki of Mizuki's plot, he had immediately gone to his residence to switch the forbidden jutsu scroll out with a replacement. The only scroll Sarutobi had found that matched the forbidden jutsu scroll in appearance though bore the title The Art and Theory of Advanced Explosive Tag Design. Once the events of the night finished playing out, Naruto had asked to keep the scroll so he could read more. Sarutobi had agreed, seeing no harm in it at the time and thinking it was just some passing fancy. It wasn't until a week later, when he visited Naruto to see how the boy was coping with being a genin, that he discovered Naruto's new hobby of manufacturing explosives in his apartment. It turned out that some of Naruto's extracurricular reading over the last year had included basic seal theory, giving him the foundation he needed to understand the topics covered in the scroll. The Hokage wondered if he should have just let Naruto steal the actual forbidden jutsu scroll instead. As dangerous as some of the jutsu in that scroll were, at least there wasn't the possibility of the boy doing something that might end up blowing all of Konoha off the map. Sarutobi refilled and relit his pipe, then leaned back in his chair to take a deep puff. In truth, no matter how much paperwork this caused he was glad to see Naruto like that again. He had watched the boy grow up and the grin he had just seen was one he knew very well. Every time Naruto was caught after a particularly spectacular prank, Sarutobi could expect to see the boy in his office wearing that expression. Naruto had become more guarded with his emotions after his brush with death and had stopped his pranks entirely. The day was the first time Sarutobi had seen that grin in 2 years and it still warmed his heart. Sitting on the branch of a large tree, Kurenai watched from above as her 3 students practiced water walking below her. Sakura had mastered tree climbing on the 3rd day of teammates' official existence and Shino soon after. Both had spent more than 2 weeks on water walking now and were exchanging blows at close to normal speed while standing on the surface of the small lake that bordered teammates' training ground. Sparring this way they were nearly evenly matched as Shino didn't quite have Sakura's level of control and still occasionally had problems with footing. Naruto had only managed to master tree climbing after nearly 2 weeks of effort and was now further down the lake, taking slow tentative steps on the water, face scrunched up in complete concentration. Kurenai winced sympathetically as he lost control once again, the surge of chakra from his feet blasting him off the water and sending him tumbling back onto the shore. Naruto jumped back onto his feet, frustration visible on his face. With a curse he stripped off and threw aside his shirt, soaked and dirty from his multiple failures, resulting either in being dunked into the water or being hurled back onto the shore. He stalked angrily to the edge of shore, expression full of intent, only to be blasted back even more violently than before on his first step over water. Kurenai dropped off her perch and put a firm hand on his shoulder before he could repeat the process. "Calm down," she chided gently, "being angry will just make it harder." "It's just," he gesticulated wildly, "I was doing better in the morning, and now I can't even take more than a couple steps." "You're tired and frustrated, Naruto, that's affecting your control. Close your eyes, calm yourself, and take some deep breaths before you try again." Naruto complied, closing his eye and trying to breathe deeply. With how angry he had been though, his first few breaths went in and out rapidly, feeling more like violent shudders. Kurenai kept her hand firm on his shoulder, feeling his pulse gradually slow and his breathing become more even as he calmed himself. When she judged that all the tension in his shoulder was gone, she released her grip. "Keep your eyes closed and just walk forward slowly. You've done this enough times to know where the shore ends by now." Naruto took 2 final deep breaths and then began walking forward. 1 foot before the other, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence as the surface under him flattened out. His eye remained closed and he kept his breathing even, moving each foot in the interval between an exhale and the next inhale. Kurenai watched as Naruto took nearly 20 steps on water before his control finally slipped and he sank into the lake with a splash. She waited patiently until he had struggled his way back to the shoreline and then offered her hand to pull him the rest of the way out. "That was pretty good. The best you've done today, isn't it?" Kurenai offered. "By 2 steps," Naruto replied, "I guess calming down really helped. Just like how you were this morning, before your repeated failures made you angry. You have a good work ethic, but take this as a lesson that not everything can be overcome by just trying again and again. Sometimes, you have to take a step back and start from the beginning." Naruto simply nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "Good, now get cleaned up and come join the rest of the team. It's about time to break for the day." But that Kurenai left him for her other 2 students. Waiting until they had broken apart from another exchange, she called out and waved them back to shore. By the time Sakura and Shino had dried off to the best of their ability from their tumbles into the lake during sparring, Naruto had rejoined them, wearing a new outfit with a towel over his shoulder, while he wrung his practice clothes dry. After the first day of water walking practice, Naruto had taken to the habit of bringing another set of clothes to team training sessions, so he wouldn't have to walk home completely soaked and dirty. Kurenai looked over her students. In the 3 weeks since they had become her charges, they had started to bond as a team. This was helped in no small part by the lunch gatherings she threw for them every weekend, under the pretense of inviting them to try some new recipe or other. She was also proud of their growth as individuals, both physically and emotionally. Naruto trained as hard as ever, while Shino kept working at his own steady pace. Even Sakura was taking her physical training seriously, and the results were beginning to show in sparring sessions. Furthermore, none of them spoke out when she had mentioned casually during morning practice that Kakashi's Team 7 had gotten a C-rank mission the day before, an extended patrol deployment on Fire Country's northern border. They didn't even complain when, after lunch, Kurenai led them to the Hokage Tower and deliberately chose the Tora mission. Asuma was the one who told her about Kakashi's deployment, as he had been leading his team into the mission hall, just as Kakashi was leading his out. She suppressed a snicker when she recalled him describing how the Yamanaka girl on his team had thrown a tantrum at falling behind her Sasuke-kun when Asuma had decided against taking a C-rank mission that day. Kurenai still had some concerns about her team, whether Naruto could really handle his role as the team's primary close combatant, and whether Sakura would be able to react properly the first time she was involved in a life-or-death confrontation. But those were the kind of things that she could evaluate only if her team was under real pressure and not in the context of performing D-rank missions or during team practice. She realized this was what one of the older Jounin instructors meant the night they had all gone out drinking before academy graduation when he said that the first C-rank mission would be one of the 2 most difficult choices she would have to make as a Jounin instructor. But it was a decision that needed to be made and she admitted to herself that she had probably already made it in the morning. "I want you 3 to sort your equipment properly tonight and get plenty of rest," Kurenai declared in her most authoritative tone. Her students looked at her inquisitively, she had never ended a training session with an order like that before. "Meet me outside the Hokage Tower 10 AM tomorrow. Team 8 is going to get its first C-rank mission." "Are you sure your team is ready for a C-rank mission, Kurenai?" "Yes, Hokage-sama." I believe it's time these three face challenges greater than Tora and a field of potatoes waiting to be picked. Sarutobi smiled as he shuffled through the mission orders before him to find an appropriate first-time C-rank mission for a Genin team. Team 7 had been the first of the new teams to get a C rank 2 days ago, after the Inyazuka boy blew up returning from a Tora mission and demanded something more challenging. Kakashi had not voiced a serious objection at the time. Sarutobi did not know whether this was due to Team 7's instructor, thinking his team was ready for it, or simply being his usual lazy self. Kurenai wasn't one to be lazy about anything though, being one of the hardest working shinobi the Hokage had ever seen. She had to be in order to rise to her current position as Konoha's foremost ninjutsu specialist from her humble civilian background. If she was allowing her team to take a C-rank mission, Sarutobi had no doubt that she thought her team was ready for it. "Ah, here we go," Sarutobi said, pulling a folder from the pile, a C-rank mission with an expected duration of 2 weeks. Kurenai took the folder and glanced through it quickly, beginning with the client's photo and going through the client's request in background, memorizing important information as she flipped a page every few seconds. By the time they had accomplished the hundreds of missions that were typically necessary for promotion, most jounin had acquired the ability to quickly parse through mission profiles for relevant details in the least amount of time. Kurenai was no exception. The Wave Country bridge builder named Tizuna, currently staying a nearby inn. Daughter and grandson at home. Protection against bandits until client finishes building a bridge. More or less a typical C-rank bodyguard mission. Turning to her team, Kurenai handed the folder to Naruto. "Take this and read through it carefully. Then go home and pack for a 2-week deployment. I'll go find our client and meet you at the East Gate in 2 hours." Having made her way out of Konoha's East Gate half an hour before the designated time, Kurenai was surprised to see that Naruto had arrived even earlier. The blonde was seated on a fallen tree by the left side of the road a short distance outside the gate, with a large traveling pack on the ground by his side. He wore his usual attire of t-shirt and cargo pants, in orange and tan respectively this time. The wooden katana, which he usually carried around Konoha in his hands, was now secured to his back with hilt extending over his right shoulder by an improvised rigging of leather straps. Over it all he wore a frumpy and weather-beaten olive-colored cargo jacket that seemed a size or two too large for him, all of its many pockets visibly stuffed with what Kurenai thought were probably kunai and other disposable weapons. Naruto was seated with his back held straight, staring passively into the distance and doing his best to look as calm and composed as a typical Hyuga elder. It wasn't a bad effort, Kurenai noted as she approached, but his artificially wooden expression and the jitter in his legs gave him away. As it was his first trip outside Konoha's walls as well as first mission with the possibility of real combat, it was not difficult for Kurenai to deduce that Naruto was trying to suppress his anticipation and nervousness. You know, if you want to fool people it's usually easier to turn one thing into another, rather than taking it and making it nothing. Eh? What do you mean, sensei? Naruto turned to look at her, confusion visible on his face. This is your first C rank and first time outside Konoha, it's natural to feel excited. You're not doing a bad job of hiding it, but the signs are still there. Your posture is too stiff to be natural, and then there's your leg too. Naruto looked down at his feet and then put both hands on the knee of his jittering leg in an exaggerated gesture of stopping the motion. He turned back to his sensei and gave her a slight grin. As I said, Kurenai continued with a smile, it's easier to hide something if you turn it into something else which will look more natural against a background. If you try to hide the thing itself entirely, that can be defeated not only by someone seeing through the disguise, but also by seeing the scene in its entirety and seeing the break in the pattern where something's missing. In your case, you can hide your feelings by turning them into something else. You could be pacing back and forth, showing how restless you are from having to wait. Or you could be bored, stretching lazily and tapping your toes to a tune in your head. I never really thought about it like that. Thanks, sensei. But that Naruto jumped to his feet and tried to do as Kurenai had suggested. He paced in slow deliberate steps, putting his heel down and rolling onto the ball of his foot before lifting the other foot for a step. The fingers of his right hand tapped lightly against his thigh, drumming to a song in his mind, while his head swayed slightly from side to side with the flow of the music. All in all he presented a fairly good picture of someone who was bored, passing time idly with some imaginary tune playing in his head. It was then that Kurenai noticed something hanging off his left hip. At first glance she thought it was a ninjutsu, held in a poorly made hip sheath angled close to the body for concealment, hilt inclined slightly forward for a quick reverse grip draw. When Naruto turned around in his pacing and began approaching her, she saw the round embouchure hole and realized it was a flute. "May I?" Kurenai asked, pointing at the instrument with a questioning glance. "Sure," Naruto replied. He drew the flute as if it were a sword and then handed it to her. Kurenai took the instrument and looked it over. It was a shinobu, a side-blown bamboo flute with 7 finger holes that she was quite familiar with. Kunoichi were encouraged to take optional lessons in various arts, such as dance and music, to increase their value as infiltration agents, and Kurenai had been an overachiever in this and other respects. She ran a finger lightly over the instrument, noting the rough finish and the uneven edges on some of the tone holes. "Did you make this yourself?" "Yeah," Naruto answered. "Gigi said once that I needed to have a hobby so I don't burn out doing nothing but studying and training all the time. There was this movie when I was a kid about a wandering samurai who played a flute he made himself, and I thought that was really cool. So that's why I found a book on how to make and play shinobu." Kurenai chuckled at Naruto's explanation of why he took up the shinobu. The reason seemed so typical of Naruto, yet the end result was something she had difficulty picturing against the backdrop of the once hyperactive blonde. Placing her fingers against the holes carefully, she gave each a few experimental taps. She had not played a shinobu in a long time, and this one was shorter version than she was used to, with a tuning that she hadn't played since she was a teenager. She lifted the instrument gingerly to her lips and, with a questioning glance to Naruto and an acknowledging nod in return, began playing the melody of a shinobu composition that held particular meaning for her. For a few minutes, she allowed herself to be lost in the memories of more innocent days as her fingers danced over the tone holes with a practiced delicacy. The melody finished, Kurenai lowered the shinobu and turned to Naruto. "Some of the notes are a little off-key, but this has a pretty good sound for having made it yourself." "I know," Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head with a smile. "You should have heard my first one. It sounded worse than cats fighting. I think the one I'm in the process of making will come out okay though." "Are you much good with it?" Kurenai asked. "Not really. I've learned the scales and some beginner songs from books, nothing like what you just played though, sensei. Until now I didn't even know anyone else who could play one. I could teach you if you like. I learned how to play the shinobu in Kodo after becoming a chunin. It's been a few years since I've played, but it seems like I haven't lost the touch for it yet." "Really?" Naruto's eye lit up in response. "I'd really like that if you don't mind. I really want to learn that song you just played too, what is it called?" She smiled at his enthusiasm. "It's not a problem, we can start with lessons after we come back from this mission. The song's name is Kachu no Yume, Dream of a Butterfly. It's a reference to a very old fable." "What kind of fable?" How do I explain it? Perhaps it's easiest for me to just tell you the fable." She arranged the words in her mind, watching as Naruto's eye narrowed in concentration. "There was once a very wise man who dreamed he was a butterfly, fluttering about and living happily as he pleased. Suddenly he woke up, solid and unmistakable in his own body. But he didn't know if he was himself who had dreamt of being a butterfly or a butterfly who was dreaming of being him now. I really have no idea what any of that meant." Kurenai laughed at that response. "Don't worry about it too much, Naruto. There are wise people who have spent their entire lives pondering the idea behind this fable. There is a particular meaning for us shinobi though." "What do you mean, sensei?" "When you look at a situation, you can't assume that what you see and understand is the truth. If you saw that you were a butterfly living a carefree life and just accepted it, you would have closed off in your mind the possibility that you could be a person dreaming of a butterfly. Instead, you need to look for any faults with the reality that you see and try to figure out if there are any other possibilities than what you currently understand." It took some time, but she watched as a spark of understanding lit up in Naruto's eye. "So that's why you like that song. You're a Jinjutsu specialist, and Jinjutsu is all about changing reality on your enemies. If they don't look past the reality that you present them, then you've won." "That's part of it, yes. It has special meaning for Jinjutsu users, but it's a good idea for all shinobi, no matter what specialty. Kakashi has a similar idea, though he prefers to call it looking underneath the underneath." "Looking underneath the underneath?" Naruto said quizzically, "That sounds kind of dumb. I think your way explained it better." Kurenai simply smiled and handed the shinobu back to him. She watched as Naruto took the shinobu from her hands and slid it back into the improvised padded rigging hanging off the left side of his hip. After he pulled a strap tight to secure the shinobu in place and turned back to her, Kurenai voiced the thought in her mind since the conversation started. "It seems odd though, to picture you playing a shinobu." "That's what Gigi said too. He said that when he told me to get a hobby, he expected something like collecting and comparing ramen, not making and playing my own instrument. He was the one who bought me the carving tools and a bunch of prepared bamboo tubes, so I could get started though." The two let their conversation lapse into a comfortable silence, and Naruto resumed his deliberate pacing, while Kurenai took his former place on the fallen tree. It was not long before Shino and Sakura arrived together, having met each other near the east gate. "Hey!" Naruto exclaimed as he saw the rest of his team approaching, "Now that you're all here I've got something for everyone." He ran to his traveling pack and pulled out a thick sheaf of what appeared to be small leaflets. Naruto then separated the stack into thirds, giving a portion to his instructor and each of his teammates. "Explosive tags, 4-second delay and just a bit more power than ones you get from weapons shops. I made them myself." If you guys need more just let me know. You made these? Sakura asked. Yeah, I've started making them after Hokage lent me a scroll about explosive tags. I mean, I'm not as smart as you are, and I don't have Shino's bug abilities, so I have to contribute to the team in some way, right? Naruto replied with a sheepish smile on his face. Kurenai couldn't decide if the pink-haired girl's surprised reaction came from the fact that Naruto was making explosive tags or that he had just freely handed her more tags than most genin could buy with a few months' worth of D-rank mission payments. Shino on the other hand stood stock still, hands still extended from when he received the stack of tags. From his slightly turned head though, the red-eyed Jounin could tell that he was watching and waiting for her to take the lead in responding to Naruto's gift. Kurenai pulled a tag off her stack and wrapped it around a pebble she picked up from the ground. After a spark of chakra across her fingertips and a small flick of her wrist, the pebble was sent flying into the forest. Exactly 4 seconds later a small fireball bloomed where the pebble had fallen. She noted that the explosion was, as Naruto had said, noticeably larger than that of a standard tag. Shino took the demonstration as acceptance, then thanked Naruto and attached several to kunai from his holster before securing the rest in his pack. Sakura hesitated for a few seconds before doing the same. By the time Team 8 was finished with reorganizing their equipment, Tazuna had stumbled past the gate sentries, looking hungover and squinting in the sunlight. After confirming some mission details with him, she then arranged her team into a standard guard formation around him. Azuna was placed in the center of the formation, while Kurenai herself took the rear so she could watch over her team while guarding against attacks from the formation's most vulnerable direction. Due to Naruto's condition, she decided to put him permanently to Tazuna's right so his one visible eye would always be on the proper side. She then put Sakura to the left and Shino on point with instructions to alternate every hour. But the final check for readiness, Team 8 set off on its first C-rank mission at Kurenai's hand gesture command. The first few hours of the trip to Wave Country passed uneventfully. Sakura barraged Tazuna with questions about Wave Country on topics ranging from local history to politics and economics. The bridge builder responded to her questions with enthusiasm, his sometimes meandering but always detailed answers, making evident his pride in his home country. Wave Country was a small island located off the east coast of Fire Country. Too small to have a hidden village of shinobi of its own, it had nevertheless been a prosperous country in the past. Its past wealth came primarily from Wave Country's status as a shipping hub for international trade, especially between fire, lightning, and water countries, but also for the various lesser island countries as well. Commercial fishing of the bountiful waters around the island and high-grade specialty textiles also contributed significantly to its economic prosperity. Recently though, an unscrupulous businessman named Gatu had stopped all of Wave Country's shipping business through a combination of hostile takeovers, extortion, and outright force. His goal was to starve the citizens of Wave Country into submission through his economic blockade, forcing them to turn over their lucrative trading business over to his control. Azuna's bridge was meant to be an economic lifeline to break the blockade, a land link through which supplies could be brought in and trade at least partially resumed. That was the reason why Gatu's hired thugs had been threatening Tazuna. If the bridge was completed, Gatu's plans would be ruined. Kurenai found Tazuna's story somewhat lacking, especially at the points where he would stop and discreetly redirect the drift of his answers. She knew of this Gatu by reputation, and if he was invested heavily enough to try and take over the entirety of Wave Country's shipping business, it wasn't likely he'd stop at just thugs and bandits. She held her silence, however, she needed more information before she could act one way or the other. The sun was beginning to make its way towards the western horizon when the small traveling party came upon a puddle in the middle of the road. With Kurenai's considerable experience with ninjutsu of various types, it was a trivial matter for her to spot the telltale signs of the two shinobi hiding within the puddle. She couldn't see any village markings, but their camouflage consisted of a jinjutsu overlaid on top of a ninjutsu water merging technique and gave her a pretty good idea of their village of origin. The fact that they had chosen to hide as a puddle when it hadn't rained for days was almost an insult to her detail-oriented jinjutsu sensibilities. She quickened up her pace to catch up with Sakura, who had taken over the point position half an hour before. Tapping the pink-haired girl on the shoulder, the red-eyed Jounin discreetly set up a jinjutsu of her own while motioning for Sakura to lead the group towards the side of the road. Kurenai didn't know how well the two hidden shinobi could see or hear under their camouflage, so to be safe, she cloaked the group in an illusion of them taking a rest break, complete with snacks and drinks being brought out and loud chatter about the latest in gossip amongst Konoha's citizenry. Once her jinjutsu was in place, she moved to join Tazuna and her team. The puddle in the middle of the road is a combination jinjutsu and ninjutsu concealment technique. There are two shinobi hidden in there, probably from Kiri, Kurenai said, in answer to their questioning looks as she pointed down the road. How can you tell, sensei? Sakura asked with her eyes locked on the puddle, cocking her head left and right trying to spot something out of the ordinary. Well, one of the ways you can pick out a Jinjutsu is the telltale blurring around the edge of the illusion. Jinjutsu users get better at hiding that with experience. I'd say this is Chunin level work. If you have a particularly good sense for chakra flow, you can also spot the slight ripples in your own chakra pathways that indicate you're under a Jinjutsu. Or, Kurenai continued, you can notice that there's a puddle of water in the road, despite the fact that it hasn't rained for a week in this area. It's easy to overlook little things like that, but details are the essence of Jinjutsu. Konoha does not have good relations with Kiri, the possibility exists that we're facing hostile ninja. Shino pointed out. We're definitely facing hostile ninja, Kurenai replied. There's no good reason for Kiri shinobi to be this deep in Konoha territory and camouflaged. The only question is whether they're missing Nin or Kiri Nin acting under orders. What if we throw a bunch of explosive tags into the puddle, would that hurt them? Naruto asked with a gleam in his eye. I'd like to capture them alive if possible, they may have useful information. Kurenai countered. She didn't mention her suspicions about Tazuna. How about these then? Something I've been working on. Naruto suggested, digging into his pack and fishing out a pair of explosive tags. Kurenai examined the tags, noting the additions to the containing matrix pattern around the central exploding node. Though one did not get to Jounin level without some familiarity with all aspects of shinobi skills, Fuinjutsu was one of her weaker subjects. The only thing she could discern was that the additions were supposed to limit the explosion in some way. It's meant for distractions, Naruto explained. The symbols on the edge are supposed to drain away the main explosive chakra, so there's no actual explosion, just the sound and light flare. If you're close when it detonates it'll leave you disoriented for a while. Kurenai nodded in understanding. It wasn't a bad idea, though it wasn't useful against more experienced shinobi, as it did everything an exploding tag did, just less of it. Confined as the two unknown shinobi were in their Jinjutsu concealment though, it would do the trick. She attached the two tags to a kunai, sent a small burst of chakra across her fingertips to trigger them, and then flipped the kunai at the puddle. It traveled in a lazy arc, turning over once before falling into the middle of the puddle and embedding its tip into the dirt road. A dark shape rose out of the puddle, it was the two ninja trying to escape from the tags. They simply weren't fast enough however, by the time they had finished unmelding themselves from the water, the tag detonated with a blinding flash of light and a deafening thunderclap. Kurenai was on the move immediately, having taken steps beforehand to protect herself from the effects of the tag. But the two ninja disoriented from the effects of the tags, Kurenai subdued them with ease, knocking them unconscious with a series of precise pressure point strikes. As she thought, they were Kiri Nin. The symbol on their hit I-8 gave them away, although their Kiri-style breathing masks were pretty indicative as well. They wore grey cloaks over brown camouflage pattern uniforms, with horned headgear that, combined with their breathing masks, gave them the appearance of demons. The most distinctive thing about the pair however was their choice of weaponry, an oversized gauntlet that began at the elbow and ended in a set of sharp claws extending beyond the fingers, coated in what Kurenai guessed was some sort of poison. The one with a single horn on his headgear wore it on his right arm, while the two-horned one had it on his left, and the pair's gauntlets were connected to each other with a vicious-looking chain, each link extended to the sides with sharp cutting edges. If she remembered her Kiri Nin profiles correctly, these two would be the demon brothers Gaozu and Maizu, Chunin twin brothers who specialized in two-man attack tactics. Kurenai broke the chain apart with chakra-enhanced strength and then checked the two Kiri Nin's pulses to make sure they were really unconscious and not faking. Once she was sure that the immediate threat was neutralized, she motioned for her team to approach and issued orders. Shino, use your Kakechu to establish a perimeter and let me know if they spot any potential hostile forces. Naruto, Sakura, guard the one with the single horn and hit him with everything you have if he shows any sign of waking. Kurenai then dragged other one a small distance into the forest, far enough that she wasn't visible from the road, but still near enough to respond instantly should her team need help. She proceeded to quickly strip him of all his equipment before producing some wire from her pack and tying him to a tree. Once her prisoner was secured she did the same with the other Kiri Nin, Tazuna and her students following her into the forest as she did so. Now, it's time for some answers. After first interrogating the demon brothers and then Tazuna, Kurenai finally had a complete picture of the mission background. She wasn't happy with what she had learned. Tazuna had lied to the mission board, saying that all the mission would entail was protection from bandits and thugs. If he had revealed the full extent of Gatyu's threats against him, this would have been an automatic B rank or higher mission. A C rank was all the impoverished wave country could afford however, thus the need for deception. She was annoyed with Tazuna's deliberate misleading of the mission board, but it didn't entirely come as a surprise. Underranked missions happened with enough frequency that experienced shinobi started to look for the signs in every mission they undertook. In this case the failure was really on the part of Konoha's intelligence analysis core, as subtle hints had been evident to Kurenai just by listening to Tazuna talking about wave country. Still, outside of Konoha's protective walls and with unknown hostile forces potentially nearby, this wasn't the best time to start pointing fingers. Kurenai turned to her team and laid out the facts for them, deciding to let them choose whether to continue the mission or not. Despite the elevated risk level, odds were they would still be able to complete the mission. She could deal with any further Chunin or less experienced Jounin opposition. Gatu decided to hire without risking her team's safety. In the highly unlikely event however that Gatu had managed to hire one of the very few elite Jounin level missing nin, who played the role of mercenary, well, that was a different matter. But that was also a remote possibility. Somewhat surprisingly Sakura was the first to decide. She argued that they had to continue because they represented Wave Country's only chance, that it was the right and moral thing to do. Shino also concurred, suggesting that this would be a good opportunity to test their abilities as a team in a realistic environment. Naruto did not contribute an opinion of his own, but nodded in acceptance of the majority's decision. Very well then, Kurenai declared once her students had made up their minds, Tazuna-san, you still have a team of bodyguards, though you're going to have to work something out with the Hokage's office about the difference in mission level payment. We'll camp here for the night and guard our prisoners, we can continue tomorrow and be at our destination before nightfall. Kurenai then set her team to making camp while she returned to the road. Following the road a small distance back, she then pulled out a kunai and made a series of deliberate markings on several of the trees by the roadside. To non-shinobi the markings would just look like random scratches or graffiti left over by travelers. Any Konoha however shinobi would recognize them together as a standard improvised sign. This section of road was regularly patrolled, it was just a matter of time before someone came to pick the demon brothers up. The night passed uneventfully and an Anbu prisoner retrieval squad arrived in the morning to pick up the demon brothers just as teammate was breaking camp. A short boat ride to Wave Country and a few hours of walking later, the members of teammate plus Tazuna found themselves standing before a small lake nestled in Wave Country's forested countryside. The road that led to their destination, Wave Country's largest town, hugged the lakeshore for a small distance before turning away into another section of forest. With the trees in the background and the way it was lit by the afternoon sun, the small lake looked like something out of a particularly vivid landscape portrait. Kurenai felt at first an intuitive twinge before her senses detected anything. Though she couldn't detect any threat she was instantly on guard. Her instincts had been wrong before, but no shinobi survived for long without paying attention to their instincts. Then she heard the whirring sound behind her. "Get down." Kurenai screamed as she threw herself over Tazuna. Beside her Naruto dropped himself flat on the ground while Shino pulled a surprised-looking Sakura down with him. She felt the wind rustle her hair as a large metallic object flew over the group. With a thunk the object embedded itself high in a nearby tree. It was an enormous sword, longer than she was tall, and with a hilt that was as long as a standard ninja too. The overly wide blade was designed for powerful cleaving attacks rather than quick agile techniques, and it had a circular hole near the end and a half-circle notch near the handle. Kurenai jumped to her feet with kunai in hand, as the sword's owner dropped out of the tree it was embedded in to stand on its hilt. As tall as his sword, his bare chest displayed his imposing physique. He was decked out in striped gray pants with arm and leg warmers in wavy brown and white patterns. His face was covered in a tight wrapping of bandages, leaving only his browless forehead and harsh gray eyes visible. Kurenai cursed under her breath when she recognized who it was. This was exactly the remote possibility she was hoping wouldn't happen. Those eyes, the clothes, the swordsman growled, "Crimson Eyes Kurenai, Konoha's Genjutsu mistress. Lamachi's Abusa of the Seven Swordsmen, demon of the hidden mist." Kurenai replied, stepping to the front of the group while waving Tazuna and her students back. "I see my reputation precedes me." Zabuza casually stepped off the blade and landed on the ground, pulling his sword down with him, before continuing, "I'm here for the old man's head. You can leave, or you can die with him." Kurenai knew she was in a bad situation. If Zabuza's bingo book entry was accurate, she guessed that she was an even match with him, all things considered. Her specialty was Genjutsu and indirect combat, though she would be most effective fighting him from range under the cloak of illusions. If Zabuza wanted to press a direct confrontation, she would have no choice but to engage him in taijutsu to draw his attention. Against an obvious specialist like Zabuza she was at a severe disadvantage. However, being a shinobi meant that sometimes you had to fight even if the odds were against you. "I'm afraid not. Tazuna is Konoha's client and we will protect him from any harm." "Well then, I guess we can play a bit before I get paid." Zabuza replied with a smirk in his tone as he lifted his massive sword. In the blink of an eye Zabuza had covered the distance between them, sword slicing horizontally from her left aimed at her midsection. Kurenai reacted instantly by moving forward and to the right. Her left hand pressed down on his left forearm, redirecting the angle of the slice into the ground. Simultaneously she slashed the point of her kunai across his throat with her right hand. Zabuza twisted his body backwards and to his right, letting the kunai passing in front of him harmlessly. He then reversed his grip on the sword and pushed forward on the hilt to slam it into Kurenai's left upper arm. Kurenai allowed the force of the impact to knock her over, flinging her kunai at him while rolling away and landing in a crouch with hands together flying through seals. Zabuza leaned to one side to dodge the kunai while pulling his sword out of the ground, then chased her with a series of thrusting attacks. Kurenai was forced to break off her attempt to create a genjutsu. Instead she drew another kunai and met each thrust with a parry and a step in retreat. After the third parry thrust, Zabuza lifted the blade of the sword up vertically, tilting it back over his right shoulder before stepping in deeply and aiming a high horizontal slash at the left side of her head. Kurenai ducked under the slash and lunged forward, intent on putting a kunai into his abdomen. She realized her mistake as soon as she moved. The thrusts had forced her back to the edge of the forest. The subsequent swing was intentionally high to lure her into this position. Zabuza's sword, instead of clearing a full arc, lodged itself into the trunk of a tree that was just behind where Kurenai had been a moment ago. Freed from having to control the massive sword on its backswing, Zabuza dropped his right hand to parry away her kunai while thrusting his left at her face in a punch. Kurenai brought her rear hand up to push the punch away from her face, but with both her arms tied up, Zabuza's follow-up right round kick caught her in the abdomen, lifting her off her feet and sending her flying into the lake. Kurenai struggled her way to the surface as quickly as she could, trying to get out of an environment which would give Zabuza an overwhelming advantage. But the water felt heavy and sluggish, like she was moving through syrup. She looked up to see that Zabuza had already made his way next to her with his left hand extended in her direction. The space between them shimmered with an odd hue, as if between them was a wall of water. "Tsuru no Jutsu," Zabuza remarked smugly. "A prison of water, controlled by my chakra. As long as I maintain contact with my hand, you cannot escape. Now, let's see how your little students react." Naruto knew things would turn out badly as soon as Kurenai fell into the lake. His extracurricular reading had taught him that each hidden village had a preferred base element, with Kirin specializing in water-based jutsu. Now his Jounin instructor was trapped in a water prison. Still, it was a stalemate situation. From what Zabuza said, he couldn't move away or the prison would be broken. Then Zabuza brought his free hand up in a one-handed tiger seal. Izubunshin no Jutsu. The blob of water pulled itself up from the surface of the lake, shifting into a humanoid shape as it rose higher. As it brought one watery leg forward to step on the shoreline, the blob's translucent blue took on hues of different colors. With its second step on land, the water clone had solidified into an exact likeness of the Kiri swordsman. Naruto grimaced, dropping his weight into a battle-ready crouch. He didn't have any illusions about being able to defeat Zabuza in close combat. He wasn't close to his sensei's level, and the guy had just beaten her. He didn't know how strong a water clone was in relation to the original, but even if he and his team managed to beat it, they would just be back to the stalemate situation, at least until Zabuza created another water clone. Naruto didn't see any option but to fight. Running would just mean being cut down by the water clone. And if they managed to get beyond the limit of a water clone's distance from the original, Zabuza would simply finish his fight with Kurenai and then come after them. Fighting would at least prevent the inevitable. Then he felt the tapping against the back of his neck just below the collar. It was one of Shino's messenger bugs tapping out a message using the standard Academy dot and dash code. Sakura had steadfastly refused to allow Shino to place any of his bugs on her, but Naruto hadn't minded. He thought the ability to transmit messages through bugs was useful and had practiced with Shino until he could decode the messages as quickly as they were tapped out. The bug user had come up with some sort of plan but needed Naruto to improvise some way to draw attention and buy time so he could set up. Well, if Shino needed a distraction, Naruto could certainly provide one. He hadn't pulled pranks in 2 years, but there was a reason Naruto was once the terror of Konoha. At least to the Chunin assigned to deal with his pranking, anyway. "Sakura, get Tazuna-san out of here. Run as far as you can, we'll catch up with you." Naruto turned to see that his words hadn't registered with the pink-haired girl. She was staring at the scene before her, wide-eyed and mouth agape in an expression that was equal parts fear and surprise. He reached over and backhanded her across the face. "Sakura, get it together. Get Tazuna-san out of here now." Sakura turned to him, shocked out of her stupor by the impact on her cheek. She slowly blinked twice before his words finally registered in her mind. With a nod she grabbed Tazuna's hand, shook the equally stunned bridge builder back to his senses, and led down the road towards town as fast as she could. Naruto wasn't proud of what he'd just done, but it was necessary. Having Sakura and Tazuna-san around just presented the Kirin with additional targets, potentially complicating Shino's already iffy plan. He made a mental note to apologize to Sakura later. If he survived. Both the real Zabuza and the water clone stood silently, watching the drama unfold with amusement in their eyes. As far as Naruto was concerned, that was a good thing. The Kirin wasn't taking him or his teammates seriously, and that was something Naruto could work with. He needed every advantage he could get at the moment. Naruto shrugged his traveling pack off, letting it drop to the ground heavily behind him. He then put his left foot forward and turned his entire body sideways to Zabuza's water clone. His right hand came up in a wide circle to his shoulder to draw his sword out of its rigging in a deliberately exaggerated manner. Once the katana was fully drawn, the arm swung in a wide circle again, forward, down, back, and finally ending with it extended straight overhead, sword pointed forward with blade parallel to the ground. Moving his left hand to the exposed part of the shinobu and gripping it backhanded, he pulled it up out of its rigging with the same exaggerated motion. Once it was fully drawn out, he flipped it upwards to hold it in a proper sword grip, careful to hide the finger holes from Zabuza's view the entire time. Acting as if the shinobu were an offhand short weapon, he positioned it crosswise in front of him, with left arm fully extended and slightly tilted so that the tip of the shinobu was angled downwards. Naruto hoped that Zabuza was fooled by his actions. Each of his weapons individually was positioned in more or less the exact way as to be the least practical in combat. The deliberately exaggerated drawing and posing motions were meant to give an impression of someone making up for lack of skill with theatrics. Finally, there was also the two-sword posture. Naruto had never practiced using two swords together, but knew from his reading that his current posture was also terribly impractical for that style of fighting. Furthermore, fighting with two swords was fundamentally different from fighting with one, needing an entirely new set of instincts due to differences in range and rhythm from having two weapons to work with. The sword theory scrolls that Jiji had given him said that being competent with two swords was far more difficult than with one, and that the only people who used two swords in real combat against highly skilled opponents were accomplished kenjutsu masters. Or idiots pretending to be masters. The real Zabuza laughed, a deep rumbling belly laugh that was unnerving for its gravel voice quality. It seems we have another swordsman here. Tell me, kid, does your sword have a name? Naruto pondered how to answer the question. A negative response would add nothing of value, but a positive response with some sort of embellished flowery name might reinforce the idea that he was pretending to be more skilled than he really was. The trouble was he couldn't think of an appropriately impressive name for a wooden sword he'd carved 3 weeks ago. Then it came to him, floating up from the depths of his consciousness as if from a dream. Tensukaya Katsu. Zabuza gave an appreciative chuckle. Heavenly chains, crazy bones, huh? That's a nice name for a sword, kid. Let me introduce you to mine. It's called Kubikiri Hauchu, decapitating carving sword. But that the water clone lifted his copy of Zabuza's sword and swung it about, as if to emphasize the point. So, kid, let's see how you match up against one of the 7 swordsmen of Mist, Zabuza continued in a taunting tone. I'll even go easy on you. Naruto snarled in return, more to maintain the act than anything else. He approached the water clone in slow measured steps, keeping his eye steady and trying to project more confidence than he felt. A few paces away, he paused briefly before lunging forward with a thrust of the shinobu, followed by a quick swipe of the katana. His strikes fell short and he darted back out of the water clone's range just as the huge blade hurtled through where he had been standing a second ago. Naruto repeated the pattern several more times, deliberately attacking from out of range so he would be able to escape from the water clone's much longer sword when the counterattack came. He could tell that Zabuza, or the water clone at least, was more amused than anything else. Its attacks were much slower than the real Zabuza's when fighting Kurenai, and between exchanges its posture deliberately left open angles of attack for the younger swordsman. Naruto came to the realization that the water clone was playing with him. Another tap against the base of his neck alerted him that Shino was ready. Naruto pushed forward again with a series of stepping thrusts, moving closer to the water clone than his previous attacks. This time, instead of moving back out of range of the counterstroke aimed at his left side, he threw himself to the right and rolled away from the clone's attack. He broke out of his roll into a crouch as Shino whipped several explosive tag kunai out of his pockets and hurled them over Naruto's head. Beneath the bandages covering his face, Zabuza frowned at the scene unfolding before him. The blonde kid with the sword was fun to play with, but Zabuza had decided that it was about time to bring things to an end. Then the other kid, the one with sunglasses who had not moved at all since the beginning of the fight, threw 6 explosive tag shuriken that landed at the edge of the shoreline. Zabuza wasn't naive enough to believe the throw had been that badly aimed. The sunglasses kid was obviously trying to create a smokescreen with the explosions. Did they think that his water clone would be easier to defeat if he couldn't see the fight? The whirring sound brought his attention to the smokescreen before him. Zabuza focused on the direction the sound was coming from and saw the blonde kid's sword spinning out of the cloud, flying directly at his chest. With a disappointed sigh, he lazily reached out and caught the wooden weapon with his free hand. If using the smokescreen to throw a sword at him was the best idea they could come up with, then those kids really weren't worth his time. It was then that he saw a second spinning shape flying towards him. Zabuza recognized it as the stick the blonde kid had been holding in his left hand, deliberately thrown under the shadow of the katana so that its presence would be hidden. His estimation of the kids rose slightly. This was almost a decent idea, tying up his free hand with a distraction before throwing something else at him. But there was one fatal flaw in the plan. Zabuza brought his hand down hard, smashing the captured sword in his hand against the second projectile. He struck with such force that the stick disintegrated into a shower of splinters, while he heard and felt the wooden sword in his hand crack from the impact. Zabuza didn't have time to do anything more as a third much larger projectile hurtled out of the smoke cloud towards him, this time from a higher angle in a downward arc. It was the blonde kid himself, Zabuza realized, jumping at him with kunai in hand. Zabuza smiled. The kid certainly could layer his plan, and against someone of lesser rank it may have worked. But here and now it wasn't enough. The elite swordsman swung his free arm outwards in a wide arc, backhanding the blonde viciously in the chest and sending him flying into the forest by the lake. No sooner had Zabuza heard the satisfying sound of the kid's body crunching against a tree trunk that his world was consumed in a cloud of writhing blackness. It didn't take long for him to realize what was going on, especially when he felt his chakra being drained. The taller kid must be an Abiram, Zabuza knew of the Konoha bug-using clan by reputation. He threw the blonde's wooden sword aside and brought his free hand up into a seal, with the intent of temporarily encasing himself in a globe of chakra-infused water. It was a low-level defensive jutsu meant to stop projectile attacks, but it would also serve to kill the massive bugs that were on his body. With his attention focused on getting rid of Shino's bugs, Zabuza didn't notice the kunai that had been thrown at him, aimed slightly above the arm maintaining the water prison. As teammate support fighter, Shino had replaced himself with a bug clone, while Zabuza fought with kunai. Then Naruto's distraction gave him the time he needed to stealthily move into position. Now he was hidden in the forest close to the water prison and at an angle where he could initiate the final part of his hastily put together plan. Shino let the kunai fly over and past Zabuza's arm before pulling taut on the thin shinobi wire attached to it. The kunai abruptly changed paths, spinning vertically around Zabuza's arm several times and wrapping the wire around it. Shino gave the wire a hard tug, pulling Zabuza's hand out of the water prison before the mist swordsman realized what was happening. Kurenai was aware of her genin student's plans. Trapped in the water prison, she had seen that the Shino on the road was actually a bug clone, had interpreted Naruto's exaggerated motions correctly, and had discreetly found the real Shino in the forest, using only her peripheral vision, while Zabuza was absorbed in watching Naruto fight his clone. The moment Shino pulled Zabuza's arm and the water prison dropped away around her, Kurenai performed a kawarimi, putting a log in her place while disappearing into the forest, using the lowest signature jutsu possible, so Zabuza could not easily track her. From this position she was at a decided advantage over the mist swordsman. She just needed to use it effectively before he found and killed one of her students. With a tactical approach forming in her mind, Kurenai moved deeper into the forest to catch up with the retreating form of her tallest student. Naruto pushed himself off the ground, wincing at the pain in his ribs while doing his best to suppress a groan. Putting himself in a seated position with his back against a tree, he gave the ribs on his left side a tentative prod. The poke resulted in his vision blurring as pain exploded from his ribs. Gritting his teeth against the slowly receding waves of pain, he ran his hand against his left side as gently as he could, feeling for bumps. He was relieved to find none, that meant at worst his ribs were cracked and not broken. He felt tapping against the back of his neck again, one of Shino's messenger bugs had managed to find him. This time it was a relayed order from his sensei. If he was still able, she wanted him to distract Zabuza with explosives while moving deeper into the forest. Naruto struggled to his feet. He wasn't out of action yet, and his team needed him. This was the role his sensei had singled him out for, something only he could do for the team, and as long as he was physically able to, he was determined to fulfill that role. Pulling a pair of kunai out of his pockets, he triggered their explosive tags and threw them at Zabuza. He then ran deeper into the forest, doing his best to push aside the pain throbbing from his ribs with every step, throwing kunai behind him every few seconds. Due to his unnaturally large chakra reserves allowing him to mass-produce explosive tags, Naruto had gotten into the habit of tagging everything he carried that could conceivably be thrown. Because of that, it was a simple matter of reaching into his pockets for the next kunai or shuriken and triggering them during the throwing motion. When he ran out of prepared weapons, his canteen, ration bars, and other traveling equipment went next. After even those were gone, he resorted to wadding up explosive tags and tossing them behind him. He never looked back and never stopped running. He could hear Zabuza gaining on him and knew that in his condition, letting the mist swordsman get close enough meant death. Zabuza was irritated. He had killed the chakra-draining bugs on him only to find two explosive tagged kunai being thrown at him. It was the blonde kid again, running around the edge of the lake and throwing tagged weaponry every few seconds like some mad bomber. The kid's aim was terrible, and Zabuza was far too good of a shinobi for explosive tags to be a real threat, no matter how many there were. That didn't mean that being in a world of chaotic non-stop explosions wasn't annoying though. Zabuza chased after the blonde, determined to put an end to the kid once and for all. He was careful to keep himself on the lake though, Kurenai was still out there somewhere and he wanted to fight her where he would have the advantage. After a short chase, darting to the side every so often to get out of a tag's blast radius, he was finally close enough. Zabuza brought both hands together, running through the seals for one of his most potent water jutsu. He was going to drown the kid and break his body with a torrent of rushing water. Suiton. Daibakufu no jutsu. Nothing happened. Zabuza's eyes narrowed, had he botched the jutsu? A moment later, the eyebrowless skin above his eyes lifted in surprise as a column of water grew out of the lake behind him, liquid tendrils grasping at his arms and legs and holding him in place. Kurenai smirked. In his haste to chase after Naruto, the mist swordsman had not noticed the genjutsu she put him under. It was meant to make him think he was still on the lake when in fact he had chased Naruto quite a way into the forest. She had closed the distance between them while Zabuza was distracted with the genjutsu and Naruto's explosive tags. When Zabuza's jutsu failed because he was too far away from water, Kurenai had taken the opportunity to attack. Meijin. Jubaku Satsu was the first original genjutsu technique she had developed and the one she had refined the most of all her illusions. Many of her peers who were less versed in the art of genjutsu were under the impression that the technique projected the illusion of a tree binding her victim before she emerged from it to slash their throat. In fact, in its current form the visual details of the illusion were drawn from the victim's own mind, using whatever image was most fitting for the situation. That was why, when used properly, it was Kurenai's most effective genjutsu. If she simply projected the illusion of a tree regardless of the battlefield, then it would be easy for her target to spot the illusion in anything but a woodland background. The name of the technique came from its first tree-specific incarnation, before she had expanded it for use in all environments. She had Zabuza trapped in her illusion, kunai in right hand ready to end the swordsman's life, when she saw a metallic flash out of the corner of her eye. Kurenai threw herself away from him to evade a pair of senbon flying through the space her elbow had occupied moments before. They impaled themselves in Zabuza's neck with a dull thud and a small spurt of blood. The mist swordsman's eyes rolled back in his head and his body fell to the ground in a disorganized heap. Kurenai whirled in a defensive crouch with kunai in hand to face the newcomer. "Thank you. I've been tracking Mamachi Zabuza for some time, but haven't had a chance to kill him. Your battle with the missing nin gave me the opportunity I needed." Kurenai did not reply, studying the newcomer carefully instead. The figure, obviously a ninja by the body posture and about as tall as Shino, was standing on the tallest branch of a large tree. Its face was covered by a ceramic mask, with narrow eye slits, a red swirl adorning the lower portion, and the Kiri symbol of 4 wavy diagonal lines etched on the forehead. Its body was covered by a hakama and bulky long-sleeved top and dull earthy tones, covered by an equally nondescript robe with muted yellow trim. The uniform of a Kiri hunter nin. "You're a Kiri hunter nin then? Your mission was to terminate Zabuza?" Kurenai finally asked. "Yes, to both questions," the hunter nin replied. "I'm sorry the missing nin had to trouble you on your journey, and I'm grateful for the assistance you've rendered me. May I come take the body for disposal?" Keeping her eyes on the hunter nin the entire time, Kurenai carefully reached down and felt Zabuza's neck. No pulse. She briefly considered the situation before moving back a few paces to indicate her affirmative response, though she kept herself in a defensive posture. The hunter nin gave her a slight bow before disappearing in a swirl of leaves and reappearing next to Zabuza's body. Having maneuvered Zabuza so that the hunter nin's shoulders supported the much larger mist swordsman's body, both then disappeared in a swirl of leaves with the hunter nin's shunshin. Kurenai kept her defensive posture for a few seconds until she was sure that the hunter nin had truly departed with Zabuza's body. Then she turned and headed deeper into the forest to find her 2 wayward students.